In April of 2012, a new game from a fairly obscure development studio, Telltale, was released, named after the IP it was set on, The Walking Dead. Or, more accurately, the first episode of this game's 5-episode story was released, the rest of which would follow in the coming months. The game was a massive success, with many players praising its innovative and unique storytelling, as well as the story's strong emotional core of the parent-child bond between your character, Lee, and a young girl you find along the way, Clementine. This launched Telltale into the spotlight, and many studios were hopping on the bandwagon of this new episodic choices matter style of storytelling that had caught everyone's attention. Tragically, Telltale itself oversaturated its own market and pushed such an aggressive release schedule that few players found their games interesting to engage with anymore, and the actual development team had no time to innovate on or polish what was becoming a very stale and predictable formula. Especially since, when you think of it, the only real innovation Telltale brought in terms of structure was the episodic format released one at a time. I do think they spent more time and effort exploring various possibilities of different conversations and actions than other narrative-focused games did before them, with Season 1 of The Walking Dead being a standout example of this. But they're not reinventing the wheel here, they're just pointing a camera towards it. The truly unique thing Telltale brought was focus on a strong narrative that people wanted to engage with, even if only in relatively small, easily delineated ways. And once the crunch came in, and the narratives became less and less polished, people started caring a lot less. The gameplay wasn't what was fun, it was being a real part of an interesting story. What drew people to The Walking Dead was not its episodic narrative structure or the choices you can make, but the ability to be a part of and influence the bond you have with Clementine. But for a few years there, other studios were replicating the structure along with the story focus, most successfully Life is Strange. And honestly, it's a shame Telltale ran itself into the ground as it did, because there's some great content hiding behind all the rubbish. Season 2 of Batman is a really phenomenal story exploring the relationship between Bruce and John Doe, this universe's version of the Joker. And how's this for choices matter? It even had the room for 2 completely different last episodes, and it's hidden behind a boring and clearly rushed first season. Season 4 of The Walking Dead has a lot of really beautiful moments and poignant storytelling, but it's hidden behind 2 miserable, rushed, unpalatably cynical seasons of slog. And it's a shame, since its 4-episode structure points to the idea that maybe Telltale was starting to wise up and prioritize their narrative over their brand, or rushing content out the door, but as we all know, it was already too late for them. But this story isn't about Telltale. This is about King's Quest 2015, a game that most people probably don't remember, and if you do, you're either a diehard Sierra fan or a Homestuck. But let's all do ourselves a favor and not open that can of worms. As far as I know, there's not really much of a controversy around it anymore, but I'd just rather not get into it. Now, unfortunately, I've never actually played a mainline King's Quest game, but I do have incredible respect for the franchise and its legacy. I do vaguely remember watching Let's Plays of a few games, specifically the scene in 6 where Alexander showed Death his face in the mirror. That sticks with you. But in any case, King's Quest 2015 was clearly designed in the shadow of Telltale's then untouchable legacy, with the Odd Gentleman taking an existing IP and exploring a narrative within it through a 5-episode story with an emphasis placed on player choice influencing the narrative, though it differentiates itself from Telltale and Square Enix by placing much more emphasis on adventure game and puzzle elements, an extremely minor element in other games of the style, which, given its source material, makes sense. I played the first 2 episodes of King's Quest on release, and I distinctly remember really liking all of the characters and having a lot of fun with what I did play, but for whatever reason, I never ended up playing past that 2nd episode. So, what happens next? Did I miss out on a forgotten gem? Before we get into it, I should note that while King's Quest itself is an enjoyable experience for all ages, this video is not. I like to swear, and I don't know how to say this without spoiling anything, but there was just no way we were getting through that first episode without saying something inappropriate. Additionally, I will be spoiling the entire game in this review retrospective thing, so if at any point you want to experience the game for yourself, I do recommend stopping the video to do so. Without further ado, let's begin. So I recorded this entire thing, and then I went to edit it, and I realized it sounded bad, so... Content notes in the description, let's ride. We play as Graham, the elderly king of Daventry and grandfather of this kid, Gwen, short for Gwendolyn, though nobody calls her Gwen.
You have such a bizarre way of making friends, Grandpa. I guess I do too. I'm known as Gwendolyn the Popular back home, but only to my stuffed bunnies.
We open on Graham telling Gwendolyn the story of how he obtained the magic mirror from the dragon in the well, which is also the story of how Graham inherited the throne of Daventry, as King Edward had no heirs and had chosen to pass on his title to a knight. Those familiar with the franchise might be asking themselves, hey, isn't that the plot of the first game? And yes, it is, but fear not, this is no reboot. Well, not exactly, anyway. The game describes itself as a reimagining of the canon series. In essence, the other games are still canon, but they are a mythologized version of events, giving the game the liberty to go anywhere from focusing on completely original events to doing their own twist on stories told in other King's Quest games. This mirror retrieval section mostly serves as a tutorial, letting the player figure out the basics of how to move and interact with things, as well as introducing the core gameplay mechanic of picking up items to overcome obstacles and solve puzzles. Movement is simplistic. I'm playing on PC, so it's your typical WASD situation to walk, and anything more complicated than that is handled with situational prompts, and I think this works in the game's favor. It's a point-and-click adventure and all but the actual clicking, so movement should be simple. One thing I noticed and greatly appreciated is that when you move between screens and the angle you need to walk changes, the button you're pushing will move you in the direction Graham is facing, regardless of the direction it would normally move you, making it easy to readjust seamlessly between screens. While the movement is clearly designed for a controller, it still works well enough, and I only ever got snagged on the corner once. I will admit I struggled with not having a jump button though.
What's that? I can't really see.
It's a spike bed thing with a dummy on it.
Oh, right. Obviously.
Yeah, why wouldn't it be
What?
that? Don't worry about it.
Dickhead.
I had no other options.
You didn't even try the jump button.
There's no jump button.
Did you try it?
You know what? You're right.
Additionally, I think the puzzles in this game are appropriately challenging. I did not find the game trivially easy, I even struggled sometimes, but I also think children will be able to engage with the game without having to adjust the difficulty, which is good, since you can't. I won't be sharing many puzzle details in this review unless I have something particularly funny or interesting to say though, partly to save something for people who decide to go and try out the game for themselves, but mostly because this review is focused on narrative. After doing some slick moves, solving some puzzles, and pressing F to pay respects, we are able to grab the mirror, and as we escape the dragon, we are given our first narrative choice. Narrative choice in King's Quest are a little unusual compared to its contemporaries, as all major choices are categorized as actions representing 3 different virtues: compassion, bravery, and wisdom, or as I like to call them, feederism, choosing violence, and fucking lying. All of your major choices are reflective of these different virtues, and while I do think this scene would, in theory, be a good introduction to that premise, I do think the way this choice is presented would be extremely confusing to someone not in the know. Firstly, all of your choices are not clearly labeled. Would you guess that the 3 different things you can shoot are the dragon's eye, this lever, and the bell, especially when you're probably thinking, oh god, I need to not get eaten by a dragon immediately? And even if you did, there's the second issue of it not being totally clear what you're actually choosing here. You could maybe figure out the bell would distract the dragon, and shooting it in the eye would be shooting it in the eye, but my sibling thought this lever was going to tighten the dragon's chains rather than release it. And even if you did understand all of that, it still does a very poor job at introducing these different virtues because there's no real connection to these ideas until after the scene is well passed over. Other than that, however, I would call this a very strong tutorial, as it gives the player a good series of introductory challenges while also laying the groundwork for this chapter's narrative. We then cut to the present, with Gwendolyn geeking out about the dragon. As I decided to free the dragon, she asks Graham why he did so, and he answers that, at the end of the day, the dragon was a caged animal who was acting out due to his imprisonment, and Graham could forgive it for its aggression knowing that. A sentiment I personally find heartwarming. He knows what he did, though. We then follow a cutscene of Gwendolyn greeting her cousin Gart, short for Gartholomew. No shit. I promise you I am not lying. I wrote this line as a joke only to find out his full name is actually Gartholomew.
Who's this dickhead?
Guard!
Oh,
Guard.
guard.
Glad you're finally here.
Right.
I've been asking about you for days.
He complains about Graham's stories while Gwendolyn says she likes them before the conversation turns to Graham's health, and don't worry guys, he's fine, he's not gonna die. Gwendolyn announces she's planning to participate in tomorrow's combat tournament, which Gart is put off by, since he's also participating, but despite his clear annoyance, he holds his tongue. The next day, don't worry guys, he's fine, he's not going to die. Graham congratulates Gwendolyn on participating in the tournament and encourages her to start making her own adventures. This leads to Graham telling the episode's main story, that of a young Graham participating participating in the Knights tournament to, well, become a Knight of Daventry. The Graham of this story is in the most powerful form one could be in 2015, once-lerfied. He is lanky, he is dorky, and he's got a neat hat. You know all that you need to know about him. Now, believe me, I will have my nits to pick. But I do like Graham a lot in this chapter. He has a dorky charm to him, and for the most part, he's a sweet boy. He falls down a very long cliff face and sees the parade of Knight hopefuls, signaling he is extremely late to the tournament.
Go around the unicorns. Or the, well, the unicorns, you know.
Yeah, the creatures.
Other way. Other way. Like behind them.
I got you. Secret path.
Secret path. Secret path. Secret path.
We get a lift from a nearby merchant to bring us to the tournament hall, but not before getting my ass conned.
Okay, you're twisting my turban here. I didn't pay you for such a deal, Deliberator. Final offer, half off the previously discounted rate. Come on, treat yourself, boy.
Well, what is the actual price?
Well, what do you know? It costs exactly that much.
Thank you. Fortuitous fate meeting you, my boy. Here you are. Now, let's Feminusi from this Meadowland, Mr. Fancy Cakes. It is go time.
That is not safe. Woo! Wow.
With the bridge to the tournament hall out, we have to cut down this tree to cross. Or, well, we would have, but this guy takes care of it for us. Or, no, I guess he doesn't. Well, that's okay. The tree got stuck downriver, so we can just cross it over here. And, oh, son of a bitch. Okay, it's fine. I didn't even want to cross that way. So we'll just cut up some logs to make a little raft and... okay, we need some rope. That's fine. Some guards we beat earlier had some. We can just use that and... Okay, is no one these days capable of any sort of respect for their fellow man? I thought knights were supposed to be men of honor, but you guys have shown absolutely no respect for your fellow competitors or even a basic sense of kindness. Where are your manners? Could any of you at least done with a thank you?
I was gonna use that rope, you turd. Oh! Thank you! Hubba hubba. Oh!
Well, this guy gets a pass. Per the hot guy's instructions, we try to shoot a rope across the river but fail, and while I would call this embarrassing, we both know I wasn't as cool as this guy anyway. Okay, this is fine. We'll just use the first plan of putting the raft together with a rope, and then we'll... Fucking... Seriously? Wait, didn't I drown in this river earlier? Once across, this guy introduces himself as Manny, short for nothing, I'm pretty sure. He noticed that it was Graham who got everyone across, and he offers us an alliance/friendship. Graham is positively geeked about this. So geeked, in fact, that he ignores that this motherfucker likes pizza-flavored jelly beans. Who are you?
I wanna hang out with the purple guy. I know. I'm not gonna make a purple guy joke.
Let me know.
I'm above that. That was my rendition of the fucking... Yeah, I got it. Cool. I wasn't sure. To be honest...
Due to being late, we missed the earlier test of chivalry, so we have to make up for it now, allowing us to meet the other knight hopefuls so we can correctly answer questions about them. First up...
I'm known throughout the land as Circumference.
Is a cheap joke, but this guy's name is Acorn. Graham doesn't like him too much on account of the tree thing, and Acorn doesn't like him right back, seemingly just for being alive. He has a pet squirrel, Princess Madeline of Avalon, and she's cute. I like her. Next is Whisper, which is short for Sir Walter, Harris, Ignatius, Sally, Percival, Eduardo, Ramon Jr. III of Modesto, and his ego's so overinflated he had to start storing it in his chest cavity. He's also very fast, which I'm hoping to use to set up a Sonic joke somewhere down the line, but we'll see how that goes. Then there's a Jaqcues, whose defining personality trait is being cooler than you could ever hope to be. He's the odds-on favorite to win the tournament, likely owing to being an incredibly skilled archer, extremely athletic and brave, and... You know, he doesn't speak a lick of English, but I get the sense he's really intelligent, and also funny, and... attractive.
Jaqcues.
God, I wish I was that hand. We also get to talk to Manny, who will give us the 411 on anyone we ask about, though he won't just give us the answers to the questions. I guess Graham is too much of a square to ask anyway. Cheaters never prosper. I think now is as good a time as any to talk about a few of this chapter's strengths, the most notable and obvious of which being the voice cast. I mean, I have no notes. I think everyone's voice is just kind of perfect, and there's only like 2 lines in the game I thought were poorly delivered. But this is a very strong cast, and it is genuinely really enjoyable just to listen to people talk. It certainly doesn't hurt that the comedic writing of this game is pretty strong. A lot of it is wordplay, and that's expected, but there's also plenty of lines that are just genuinely amusing. And even ignoring that, the pacing is very deliberate and dialogue is snappy, so there's a constant strong sense of forward momentum.
I'm Graham.
No last names. I don't even want your first name.
Unfortunately, Those blue flames are the only things that spook the pack. So I'm forced to return to their shop of wizardry and toiletries.
Well, my father was a knight, and my grandfather was a knight, and my great-grandfather, well, he was a dentist, but his father was a knight. Basically, I come from a long line of protecting crowns. I started looking for night jobs while I was still in the...
Kids, don't stop screaming until Dad pulls over the wagon.
Oh shit.
This is just a floating...
Is this it?
Dude, nice! It's a floating island! Yeah, it's so cool.
This itself is supported by the game's animation, and while there's a spot of clipping here and there, I think the sense of personality in these animations are so strong it outweighs any technical complaints on my part. Having passed the test of chivalry, all the knight hopefuls are tasked with acquiring the eye of a hideous beast. This leads to our next significant choice. What method do we use to get an eye? The different virtues are each tied to the 4 people foolish enough to continue living in Daventry, who will guide us along our different choice paths. Amaya Blackstone, the blacksmith, who represents bravery.
Bye for now.
Don't forget leg day!
You got it. You yell, I am right here.
Wincy Faye, the baker, who represents compassion.
Looks like we could put some love on those bones.
Good day. Good day. I said good day.
And Chester and Muriel Hobblepot, who run the magic shop and represent wisdom.
Zounds! Did you just read my fortune?
No, we're just very old and very judgmental people.
Real. So true.
As I'm doing a good boy run for good boy points, I will be consulting Wincy on this one, though you can talk to all of the shopkeepers and will eventually need to go through their shops and side quests in order to get everything in this chapter done, and I think there's enough variance in presentation that it doesn't feel completely phoned in from a narrative perspective.
Cave.
Oh.
Oh!
So, this bridge troll, Ulfie, is hangry, so Graham offers to get him something to eat, and he'll get us the eye of a hideous beast in exchange. We get him his pie, and Ulfie does indeed follow through, so 1 eye later...
Whisper? I swear to God.
Okay, 2 eyes later... Son of a bitch! Ulfie just submits his own eye, which, I mean, I wouldn't argue with, would you? We're on to the next round of the tournament, except the Jaqcues actually hasn't gotten back yet, and due to...
Proclamation 4637373467378776333.1.5.
Someone needs to go find him, which we're volunteered for. He was last seen heading to the well in order to get an eye from the dragon, so we follow behind. Jaqcues, seeing Graham and realizing A, he's not leaving, and B, this twink is going to get himself killed, decides to guide us through the well, and we actually start learning a few words of his language, those being Afanada for yes, and Stalama for no, which I actually still remember all these years later. Be grateful for the fact I decided to cut the page-long tangent I had about Jaqcues' language. In any case, largely due to Graham's clumsiness and incompetence, we end up getting lost deeper into the cave and embarrassing ourselves in front of the coolest guy that's ever even looked in Daventry's direction, and we have to help each other in escaping, and I promise you my sibling and I were extremely normal about the extended amount of time we spent with him.
I would have sex with him.
What?
What?
Oh my god. Nobody was saying something so inappropriate and uncouth.
I don't know, you did kind of just hubba hubba him.
Well, hubba hubba doesn't mean I want to have intercourse with this man.
It doesn't?
I mean, it does, but it's like, but it's in polite terms.
I see.
You overtly were like, I want to partake in intercourse.
Well, I think I'm being more sincere, really.
Now I can buy the thing, and do the thing, and I can go have gay sex with a Jaqcues. I don't think that's how the game.
I mean, they don't. The jump button doesn't work, so I guess the gay sex button probably doesn't work either.
That is a QTE you do not want to biff. Hi! Hey, big sexy! The language barrier can't stop me.
Yeah, I'll offer your nada.
She offer on my nada till I Jaqcues. I don't know. Yeah, that. Oh my god.
You want to do what to me?
What is that even? Oh! Oh!
Dude, I've never even been with a man before. So no is Stalama?
Yeah.
No. That's a lot of syllables to say no.
It is.
Which I guess that doesn't... Oh!
Oh, buddy! Oh, I'm on fire!
So I got distracted by how cool and sexy he was.
Yeah, no, I mean...
Oh my god!
God, he's so cool.
I crave him.
Me too.
Sharp and pointy.
Sharp and pointy.
Just like my wiener when the fucking Jaqcues comes on screen.
So true! So true!
Looking out, Jaqcues.
Mm-hmm. And by good looking out, I mean good looking. I'm running away. Oh! You didn't hear that.
He's just standing there.
And he's just like, Jaqcues.
He is like that, bro. He would so say that.
Oh! Alright, I couldn't blame Graham for not getting this one. Ooh, okay.
I don't even have any commentary. It's just like, wow! Wow, dude.
Is this the part where we kiss?
It needs to be.
That's kind of like a kiss.
We should kiss wieners. Sorry, what? Who said that?
Oh my god! Jaqcues thought it was funny.
Whoosh! You know, just give him a good old... Hurt my hand on the metal, I don't even give a shit. So, slap ass?
Huh? Bro.
Slap it, bro. What the fuck is going on here?
I think this is gay sex. I think this is
I'm
it.
scared that I touched his prostate. I don't know what happened.
Now, maybe it's just because I'm in romantic love with Jaqcues, but this is easily my favorite part of the entire game. It has a very similar vibe to your A Way Outs and your It Takes Two's of the world, where you run through a series of challenges that you have to work together in to reach your goal. Now, obviously those games are multiplayer games, while this game is single player, but I think King's Quest does an excellent job of tapping into what makes those games effective. It is using the mechanics of the game to inform a relationship between two characters in a way raw narrative cannot. Jaqcues cannot make it through this door without you, you can't get out of this cage without him. It is a reliance and trust in one another that overtakes even the fact they can't speak the same language, with most of it being communicated through body language, and there's a lot of little scenes that reinforce that growing bond. In the beginning, Jaqcues clearly finds Graham a nuisance, but by the end we have scenes of Jaqcues straightening out Graham's feather or teaching him how to properly shoot, with Graham's little glance to ask if he's doing it right. I just think that's cute. This one scene right here where Graham starts to think he had been left behind only for Jaqcues to come back and help Graham get up is just really nice after all the other knights have been taking advantage of Graham's abilities and then leaving him to fend for himself. From a game design perspective, I love this part. From a narrative and character perspective, I love this part. I think it's incredibly effective, and Jaqcues and Graham should kiss, I don't know. And then Jaqcues dies. He gets flung into the goddamn wall, and he's already helped Graham escape, so all Graham can do is watch as Jaqcues gets absolutely bodied by this dragon. I wish I had interesting reaction footage of this, but my sibling and I both remembered this would happen. His death is just so tragic that it's impossible to forget. If you remember one thing from this game, it's this brutal, unfair death.
Oh, he took off the hat. No, but like fair.
Yeah, no, I mean, God, he just fucking got bodied, dude.
And he took my gay virginity in there.
It happened. No one else believes me, but it happened.
Extremely disheartened and blaming himself for Jaqcues' death, Graham decides to leave the competition, but not before Manny stops him to let him know how Jaqcues had entered this tournament because his village of H2A had been struck by famine and he was hoping for an audience with the king to help them. And while he can no longer do that, he did see Graham as someone who had a lot of potential and was capable of creating change for the better. This, I guess, inspires Graham enough to get him back into the fight. Now that we're feeling completely normal and fine, actually, it's time to get ready for the duel of strength and speed. And while the guards claim the selection process was random, they also put me against known strongest competitor Acorn in the duel of strength and known fastest competitor Whisper in the duel of speed, which seems like bullshit to me, but the guards don't seem receptive to criticism.
Oh, there's bones. Oh, I love how they're just like a patty. And then it's like not even like floating, it's just like, bones.
So we have to do a little, you're adventure gaming here. You grab a meat, you put it in a bush for the badger, put the badger on the squirrel pumpkin, take the pumpkin to the potion shop, put a candle in its hole, and use that as a lamp to get through the Wetzel wolf-infested forest because blue flames repel them. What about that isn't immediately obvious? There's your fair share of obtuse solutions and your fair share of solvable ones. It's typical adventure game fare. We also find the merchant again, which I bring up because Graham says merchant like it's a slur.
You dirty merchant!
There's something kind of uncomfortable about this, isn't there? Like, it's not just me, right? So, some context. The Bridge Trolls are part of a union, and they're all currently on strike due to mistreatment from the guards, which I'll discuss a bit more later, but for now the takeaway is as a part of their strike, they've all removed the mouthpieces from the horns used to summon them to their various bridging spots. This is fine, though unfortunately it does make winning the Duel of Strength difficult, as the loser is whoever gets tossed into the water, and less bridge means more water. Granted, there is no way we were winning this duel anyway. The only reason we haven't been technically eliminated is because Manny threw us a raft at the last second, but there's no way we could actually push Acorn into the water, so I guess we'll just have to move on. Our next task is to get all the Bridge Trolls' mouthpieces in order to cheat at the Duel of Strength. Cool! So this is morally dubious on multiple fronts. Front A, we should, by all means, have lost this duel, and while our Bridge Troll strategy is, technically, in line with the rules as written, it isn't really in line with the spirit of the rules, and as a total square, that's a thing I care about. Front B, in order to get into the Bridge Troll union meeting, we have to lie about being a troll, and we're doing that in order to steal Waddle's mouthpiece.
And I love the taste of scab.
Wait. Being called a scab? Having a companion who would die for me as a matter of principle? Graham's near suicidal levels of substance abuse? Is this secretly Disco Elysium? No, that's dumb. Front C. We then poison Pilar with hypnosis powder in order to steal her mouthpiece, which leads to front D. We then use the mouthpiece to summon the different Bridge Trolls during the fight, summoning Pilar as well as the other Bridge Trolls against their will. King's Quest 2015 scholars might be tempted to point out that in the second chapter, Graham summons Pilar and she isn't forced to respond due to being off sick, but Pilar is clearly annoyed by our actions, so even in the best case, she's still under the effects of hypnosis powder here in the first chapter. Whatever the case, I just feel like I could have done some sort of favor for her rather than stealing her shit and making her cross her own picket line. Put a pin in all of that. Actually, put 2. So, I don't feel good, and neither does Acorn, because during the duel I ended up yanking out this sock he was knitting, and the guards have absolutely no shame in mocking Acorn for this because men having hobbies is embarrassing and cringe. Long story short, I trick Acorn into the drink and me into the air, meaning I win fair and square. Acorn's understandably pretty pissed off about this.
See you around.
Is that a fat joke? You disgust me.
Sorry, man. I didn't mean it like that.
But Graham returns his sock to him, sincerely apologizes, and compliments Acorn on his craftsmanship. Acorn, in turn, reveals he's only in this competition to please his parents and actually wants to open a craft shop, and is genuinely touched that someone complimented him on his work. This is adorable, and I love him.
Aww. He's nice now. Aww, he just wanted to feel good about his craft. Aww.
We ask him to get our, steed Triumph out of the tree, and Acorn obliges, meaning we are ready for the Duel of Speed. We also meet Larry and Kyle. They seem nice. The Duel of Speed is kind of a mess and a half, but somehow no addendums account for this shit, so we're golden. Now, as you might imagine, we should have lost this race. Whisper is just faster than us, but Manny pulls out some addendum, and we win by tricking Whisper into bodily harm and showboating. This makes me feel bad about myself, but Whisper feels even worse about himself. My poor heart can't take this, so I ask him for an autograph to help cheer him up. Whisper thanks Graham for the pick-me-up, and for the first time even gets his name right. We ask Whisper to pick us up a frog, which yada yada yada, now we have a whitening potion, which is the last thing we need before facing off Manny in the Duel of Wits, which is a board game. Manny, in order to make things more interesting, suggests both he and Graham drink from one of 3 cups of raisin juice, one of which is poisoned with hypnosis powder. Graham agrees, gets poisoned, and loses on account of having no free will while Manny monologues sinisterly. Larry and Kyle decides this is bullshit and addendums the fuck out of this situation. We mark a cup with the whitening solution, which Manny doesn't notice somehow. Even assuming he had monochromatic color blindness, white is still very different from dark gray, but I think we're officially getting to the point where I'm asking too many questions. Is he just too short to see it? I tried to beat Manny legitimately a few times, but I knew from experience I could easily sink a few hours into it if I wasn't careful, and I had other things I wanted to do with my day, so I had Graham make it more interesting by asking Manny to poison one of the only 2 cups, and since I am always able to select the safe one, Manny loses.
There is no shame in cheating a cheater.
Well, here's the thing with that. Manny never actually cheated. He's scummy and deceitful, and he's certainly not above cheating, but Manny never actually does. He just helps us cheat. He won the race against Acorn and the duel against Whisper completely within both the written rules and spirit of the competition, which is more than Graham can say, and I would certainly consider brainwashing your opponent into throwing the competition to be cheating if it weren't for the fact that, everyone seemed to agree to it. The guards are fully aware of what's going on with the drinks, and Manny makes it very clear to Graham that he is using this hypnosis powder, and while Graham doesn't verbally agree to its use, I do think under these specific circumstances it's reasonable to assume he does agree to Manny's conditions on account of the fact he doesn't say, "No, I would like to play the game the normal way, please," and drinks the raisin juice, knowing it might be poisoned. Graham isn't lied to, Graham isn't forced, Graham isn't even under significant social pressure. Manny and Graham both played legitimately by the rules. Manny and Graham both agreed to, and Graham lost, which at this point I think has come up it's more than anything. And Graham and Larry and Kyle all just act like this is completely out of his control somehow. And then Graham proceeds to cheat by whitening one of the drinks without Manny's knowledge, which I am required to do, but the game considers this winning legitimately and poisoning him with the powder to be illegitimate, even though Manny does agree to the use of the powder. And none of this is getting into the fact that the whole thing is rigged anyway, because Larry and Kyle literally will not let Manny win no matter how many times he does so, even if he does so by the game's own logic of legitimate. But whatever, addendum about it. So, we've officially won knighthood, fair and square, and Manny is pissed about it. He challenges us to a duel of strength, but we win with Pi, because Pi was the good boy option, I guess. He then suggests a duel of speed, which Graham refuses, and Manny tries to convince him by invoking Jaqcues' name. Dick move. Manny fucks off. We then get to see Gwendolyn participating in the tournament, which I'm starting to think is just a thing their parents made up to keep them busy, because no one is here except for this guard. As Gwendolyn's actions will be informed by the virtue you chose, she starts flinging eggs at Gart, which I wouldn't consider particularly compassionate, but I suppose it is kinder than stabbing someone. This happens.
Come along, quickly! It's your grandfather!
But don't worry guys, he's fine, he's not gonna die. So, final thoughts. As mentioned before, the voice cast, art, and animation, and the construction of the writing are all very strong this chapter, as they come together to lend a great sense of charm and personality to the whole thing, which is a trait I sincerely hope will be carried forward throughout the game. I think Whisper is a particular standout in this regard, as he really shouldn't be as enjoyable a character, given his only personality trait is an absurdly large ego, but when he's on screen I can't help but kind of love him. As I geeked out about earlier, the section with the Jaqcues and the well is easily my favorite part of the entire game. I won't repeat myself here, but it is clear to me the developers wanted to nail this segment, and they absolutely did. I think it would be hard to not get at least a little attached to a Jaqcues. He is truly the first chapter's shining star. He's just an excellent display of narrative control and visual storytelling. Additionally, I found the game fun. I enjoyed puzzling my way through things, and I know this is kind of a low bar, but considering even today titles from larger studios than Odd Gentlemen are falling short of it, it's worth pointing out the game actually works. In the interest of transparency, I will let you know that at one point I couldn't open the game because the resolution wasn't set correctly, and I had to go into the game files and change it from there. However, I was the one who set the resolution incorrectly in the first place, so that's at least kind of my bad. So while I've never had a game be straight up unwilling to open due to resolution settings, I'll give the game a pass on that one. Other than that, I've had no issues, it works as intended, and that's not always something you can count on with a game. There are some limitations with the game, most notably in the fact it feels fairly small in terms of people and size, but this is an indie game made with limited resources with a price tag that I think is fair, and I think it's very important to meet a game where it's at when evaluating it, so I'm inclined to be very forgiving on this front, especially since I think they made the right call of focusing their attention on making what they did have work well and carry as much weight as possible rather than try to give the game an artificial sense of scale, and I think for what it is, they did a great job. Now onto the things I think don't work as well, and look, the segment is going to be long because I got carried away and I'm gonna let it happen, but don't let it give you the impression I think this chapter is bad, because I don't. I think it's really good. I understand why I loved it then, and I still love it now. I just have strong feelings about this one particular grievance. There are some broader issues with the game that are already starting to show, but as they're representative of writing issues across all episodes, I'll get to those at a later point in the video. Instead, I'll focus on just this episode, and my precious 43 subscribers, I hope you're excited, because it's time to talk about framing! Now, on the face of it, I don't necessarily mind that Graham is willing to do some unethical things to get his way, as I don't think a character needs to be a good person for a narrative to work, and in terms of my own personal enjoyment, a character's morality is not be-all end-all. And in fact, I don't even mind that Graham is in one moment capable of showing a great degree of sensitivity and compassion for other people's emotions, and in the next is perfectly willing to rob someone of their free will for the sake of cheating in a fight. What I mind is the framing. Some of the actions Graham takes in this chapter are just flat out immoral, and he does them for petty reasons, but the narrative has absolutely no interest in interrogating that, and the audience is left with the not untrue but also not completely fair impression that Graham is a kind of bumbling person, as his acts of kindness and likability are given attention and emphasis over any legitimate grievances people might have with his actions. Like, Pilar never says, hey, it's fucked up you poisoned me, even though she by all means should. The worst Graham actually gets is Acorn and some guards complaining about him cheating during the Duel of Strength, and even then that has no lasting consequences and it's mostly played for laughs. It's not that I want Graham to be evil or for the game to become this miserable experience of doing awful things to people who don't deserve it and then the game yelling at you for doing it, but if Graham is going to roofie someone, I don't want to sit here and pretend he didn't because it's inconvenient for your story. Meanwhile, Manny, who as far as we know through all available information earned his spot in the competition legitimately, is framed as a cheater who deserves to have his victory robbed from him. And since I highly doubt this game is going for the Graham's memory of self-serving angle, I'm kind of left feeling sort of like a bad boy. Like, maybe giving a guy a pie somehow doesn't counteract the human rights violation I committed. Thing is, I think this all could be resolved fairly easily without even changing the puzzles or much of the narrative structure, which is by having Manny pressure Graham into doing these morally dubious things. Manny immediately identifies Graham as one of the more clever contestants, but also as someone who would be pretty easy to manipulate. And when Graham leaves the well and is fully prepared to storm out of the competition altogether, Manny keeps him in by lying about Jaqcues' motivations for participating in the tournament, and probably also this idea that Jaqcues saw a lot of potential in Graham, presumably because he wanted Graham around since he's the easiest to control. Additionally, a lot of Graham's cheating is facilitated by Manny already, so why not just double down on that? Graham sees Manny as a friend he can trust and openly shares that he feels responsible for Jaqcues' death, so just have Manny push on that sore spot, have him subtly or not so subtly confirm Graham's feelings of guilt, and then have him suggest Graham lie, cheat, steal, and generally be underhanded because there's no way he's winning his duels legitimately, and when Graham refuses or questions these tactics, have Manny tell him he has to, because he wouldn't have wanted Jaqcues to die for nothing, would he? And by the time the Duel of Wits comes around, we've got a few different options to work with. The hypnosis powder as it is probably works just fine, though we could also just have Manny poison Graham without his knowledge, which I think makes the most sense since it's the most underhanded, or we could even just have him tell Graham to throw. To round out the new plot, I think either way, we could have Manny rub it in by guilting Graham over the shit he made Graham do in the first place, and conclude Graham would be a terrible night, with Graham responding apologetically, with shame, and everybody watching this is kind of like, hey, this is sort of fucked up actually, and decide to help Graham out here. Maybe even have Whisper and Acorn there and support to solidify their new friendship, and things can play out more or less as they do in the game, with Graham maybe blowing up a little more when he realizes Manny was just making shit up about Jaqcues specifically to hurt his feelings. And regardless of if Manny cheated or not, in this version, it is clear he is a manipulative, mean-spirited person who has legitimately wronged Graham, and him getting some sort of comeuppance would be pretty satisfying. There's a voice in my head telling me people will disagree with this idea on account of this being an all-ages game, and while I understand that concern that I made up for you, I also think children are more capable of handling emotionally difficult experiences in fiction than we give them credit for. There's still plenty of whimsy and feel-good moments to keep the game from getting bleak, as I don't think going full-throttle abuse hours would be to anyone's benefit, and I think it's important to meet children on their level to talk about these sorts of difficult life experiences, especially since the unfortunate reality is that there are children who will be able to recognize their own relationships in this. I do think there would need to be a scene added into the game to help this feel a little more resolved and conclusive, either within the story or through Graham's modern-day narration. Something just to acknowledge that it was Manny who put Graham into such a difficult emotional and moral place, and while it makes sense he would feel guilt over it, it's not his fault that he was put in that position, and he could only do what he thought was best. And then Gwendolyn's like, okay Grandpa, I'm gonna go throw eggs at my cousin now. Anyway, I got carried away there. Overall, I think this chapter's strong, narratively and gameplay-wise. On a craft level, it's well done, and I like all of the characters a whole bunch. I like all of the characters a whole bunch. Aside from that one grievance, I have no notes. I'm allowed to do this. I was watching Quentin reviews before it was cool. So as there are certain topics that I kind of want to talk about but can't really fit into the summary proper, I have decided we shall be doing intermissions. And when it comes to chapter 1, there's a lot I could talk about but just don't have anything that interesting to say. And believe it or not, I am trying to respect your time. This chapter holds a special place in my heart, given it's the one chapter I really fandomed about before I moved on to other things. But honestly, I don't really have anything interesting to say in that regard. I wish I could better record contemporary fandom reaction and activity, but the only thing I have is the vaguest memory of fan art of the Night Hopefuls. I do specifically remember one piece of fan art of a Jaqcues carrying Graham, and it's that meme of, do I weigh anything to you? No, it's like carrying a bundle of grapes. If you made that piece of fan art, I honestly don't remember what it even looked like anymore, but it left an impression on me. Thank you for making it. Oh, I guess I also remember there was like this was like in the era where your favorite problematic posts were becoming popular, and I remember there was one for Graham, and I was just like, that's stupid, and I'm not gonna read it. And I do think, you know, your favorite's problematic posts are stupid, and they're not very helpful literary analysis. But looking back on it, even without reading it, I probably would agree with it. That said, there is one thing I want to talk about that is very prominent in this chapter. So prominent, there wasn't really a great spot to stop and talk about it, and that would be the absolute state of affairs in Daventry, which are bad. And that's not me extrapolating and making a haha. I mean, I am a little bit, but multiple characters mentioned that Daventry has been going south, as King Edward has been doing very little to run the kingdom after the death of the Queen. When Graham arrives, the bridge trolls are on strike, because the pointed shoes the guards wear are really painful, and were so damaging they even left scars on the backs of the bridge trolls, and the guards are refusing to meet their demands because they don't want to. As a result, Woodsel wolves have been unable to migrate across the rivers and have been getting more aggressive, and commerce in and out has been near impossible. For a more robust society, this might spell doom, but Daventry has an entire 7 citizens and like maybe 6 knights for every one of them, and they seem to get on just fine despite the fact the pumpkin fields only turned out one good crop, which I used to make a flashlight. However, despite being a police state in the most literal sense, the wolf problem seems to be handled almost exclusively by the blacksmith and this wooden door, and the Hobblepots go out of their way to warn me that this area isn't safe.
Just be careful. Around here, compassionate people get taken advantage of.
Motherfucker, you gave me hypnosis powder as a freebie. You are the primary distributor of taking advantage. And hey, on the topic of knights, can we talk about the Night Hopefuls right quick? Because 3 of them are specifically mentioned to not be from Daventry, and Acorn and Manny most likely aren't local either. And not only that, but both Acorn and Whisper are actually knighted elsewhere. It seems to me that these guys are only here because they heard the king's title was up for grabs and were willing to put up with having to live in Daventry in order to get it, which I assume is the only way Daventry is able to gain population at this point. And they still only managed to attract 5 people, one of whom refuses to speak the language even though he can seemingly understand it well enough, which is honestly based of him. Even Graham said he was interested in becoming king because he likes a project. Also, the currency at Daventry is shiny gold coins. This isn't like a bad thing, but it's kind of a mouthful because every character fully says shiny gold coin every time, and you start to notice it after a while. Hey everybody, so as you can tell, the mic quality for some reason is suddenly much worse, and I don't know why. And I tried to fix this, but it's, I don't know, I can't figure out why it's doing this. So the rest of this video is just going to have worse mic quality. So if you could all just do me a favor and ignore that, because I worked really hard on this video, and, I just can't fix it. This is like the 3rd time I'm coming in to try and fix the audio, but I can't do anything about the mic quality suddenly being garbage. So just, actually, if you could just like leave a comment that's sort of like a detailed explanation about why this drop in mic quality is actually, really good and, like a very artistic choice for the video, that would be awesome. Okay, bye. We start the episode with the newly crowned King Graham looking into the magic mirror to see his future of him being attacked by the dragon, which is not comforting. His musings on death are interrupted by several guards coming in to ask for his rulings on various addendums and decrees.
Which colors do you prefer? Scarlet sunset or crimson colada?
Crimson Colada.
Crimson Colada, just because of the pose.
and this gets very overwhelming very quickly. This is another scene I think is effective, as questions are hurled at you so fast that it gets hard to keep track of what you're even answering, and the music starts picking up pace to match the chaos. At a certain point, I don't have time to read my responses. I don't even know what I'm clicking in on half of these. Wait, I sent Whisper to negotiate with the goblins? Oh, fuck me. Graham can't even get a word in edgewise, his confidence deflates, and eventually he calls distress and forces everyone in the room out. We press F to pay respects and go out into the rain to get some air. Once outside, Ulfie meets up with us. Graham admits he feels very underprepared to be king since his time as a knight was mostly spent questing, and he worries he won't live up to King Edward's legacy. Ulfie, real one that he is hyping up Graham by reminding him of all of his capabilities and that King Edward was hardly perfect. As we've covered, Daventry was an absolute mess by the time Graham arrived. Also, this conversation implies that Pilar is actually a knight since she was eligible to apply for the crown. I was going to use this as a setup to refer to Pilar as Sir Pilar for the rest of the review, but she never shows up again. Ulfie carries us into town so we can drown our sorrows in a custard pie, and then... Oh, son of a bitch, this is what I get for letting Whisper handle fucking anything. Hard cut to the present, Gwendolyn is scared of thunder, so she goes to see what Graham is up to. Turns out Graham had fallen and broken his arm at the end of last episode, and Gwendolyn finds him getting fed up with his limited mobility. Since neither of them can sleep and Gwendolyn is clearly terrified of the storm outside, Graham offers to tell a story. Gart will join in a little later because of what Gwendolyn said about how he could learn a lot, but mostly he provides vague, meaningless criticisms of our choices.
Yeah, I would have taken the other path.
Is this story about your choices or mine?
The goblins, for unknown reasons, have decided to kidnap Graham, throwing us into a dark prison cell. A few busted kneecaps later, we got ourselves a little reptile friend and some delicious, nutritious table porridge.
Why oh, you don't have to pour it out of the fucking... Just drink it out of the bucket.
An undetermined amount of time passes, and the porridge has run dry, so circumstances are dire, but luckily some of the goblins have gotten bored of maintaining the prison and make Graham do their chores instead. While doing so, we're able to see that basically everyone else in Daventry has been kidnapped. Amaya's holding up just fine, but Wenty's girlfriend, fiancé, wife Bramble is pregnant and very sick, and Chester...
Hello, little froggy friend. Mind if I taste your back? I'm sure I could make it worth your while.
Well, Chester has Muriel, at least. As we're the only one able to leave our cell, it's up to us to figure out an escape strategy and maintain everyone's health, as we are also the only person with any food, since the goblins will give us food every day to feed their rat thing that guards their... chair. Alright, chair. Graham, by his future self's admission, is terrified and feeling the pressure of this task, as it's bringing up a lot of that earlier guilt and sense of failure from the last time someone's life was in his hands, and he seems to be suffering from some form of PTSD as he hallucinates images of the dragon from said incident. At this point, the game is going through great pains to let the player know that it's not possible to take care of everyone and someone's gotta go. This is true, as while it is totally possible to keep everyone fed, 2 of the prisoners are sick and you cannot cure both of them, those being Bramble and Mr. Fancy Cakes, the goat dressed as a unicorn the merchant uses to pull his wagon I deem too unimportant to mention even in passing. So yeah, a bit of a softball there, but we'll 07 and chat all the same. On that note, the merchant's also here, but he's taking care of himself just fine, and he somehow turned his cell into a commissary. For some reason, this game expects me to just trust that this medicine he's selling is legitimate after last time, but Bramble isn't dead, so I guess I can't complain.
Do I even want to bother with keeping Mr. Fancy Cakes alive? Because, like, who gives a shit, right? I feel like you should try.
As we explore, we don't learn a whole lot more about what the end goal of all this kidnapping is precisely, but we do learn that a lot of the goblins seem to be obsessed with the idea of fairy tales and are trying to reenact them, such as The Princess and the Frog, Princess and the Pea, and Cinderella. And the fact that I can't give this goblin a little kiss is upsetting to me. I mean, look at him, he's so excited to see me!
So fucking true. Like, Graham! Me! Fucking got him.
Oh, but I can go show off my dick-sucking strats to the Hobblepots?
Apologies. Been working on that.
This does kill the Hopplepots. Some might argue that it was actually the fact that they starved several days later because I was playing without a guide and my route was suboptimal. But I know the image that haunted them as they took their last breaths. We're not going to talk about it.
Who is that? Oh my god!
They might be super dead. But, you know, I think I did my best, and that's really what should...
Bro, what did you do?
I didn't have enough food to feed everyone today, and I needed the key, so... Having sent the Hobblepots straight to hell, it's time to, finish the chapter now. Yeah, the vast majority of our time in this chapter is spent on raw puzzling with very little character interaction, so I know this is sort of sudden, but we're at the end. As I am a good boy, and it is my life's mission to earn good boy points, I free the fays, and while Wenty stays behind to make sure everyone else is fed, Bramble goes with us to get us out of the prison and meet with the Goblin King. At this point, we cut to the present. Gwendolyn has fallen asleep, so Graham asks Gart to get a guard to bring her to bed. Gart wants to keep hearing the story, and Graham tells him off for continuously interrupting it. Perhaps having heard our heckling, Graham apologizes.
What the fuck? Let your damage, Grandpa.
Yeah, let your damage, Grandpa.
Jeez Louise. God forbid he's invested.
Yeah. I'm so sorry he's a teenager.
He's not even like a tool, he's just like a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
apologize.
Wrong.
We lead Bramble across some stone pillars, pressing up to pay respects all the while.
Quick, in my cape! No time to explain.
Shit, wow. And on our way to the Goblin King, we see that all those guys who died earlier are fine, actually, so the softball is basically non-existent at this point. And if it weren't for the fact that last chapter I watched the man have every bone in his body broken, I would call the odd gentleman a bunch of cowards, but I did, so I won't. We then continue across this dragon shadow, and Graham tells Bramble to get in his cape for her safety, but it turns out the dragon is just this little guy right here. I hope we get to keep him forever. We also come across this guy who is much taller and not nearly as green as the other goblins, and I can't say for sure this is the basis for why he gets bullied by the other goblins because I don't speak goblin, so I wouldn't be able to tell you. But it does sort of seem that way. We do help him out though, and in exchange he helps us across this gap and into this library. Now, while I may not be able to speak goblin, I can apparently read it just fine, as I have no trouble reading.
Fanny?
Yeah, Manny, I guess. That's right. Manny wrote this book, a fairy tale story of a piper imprisoning an entire kingdom down a well so he could take advantage of the goblins' obsession with fairy tales to imprison a bunch of people, presumably so he could take the throne in the meantime, but I can only assume Larry and Kyle addendumed about it because this completely isn't a problem. The kingdom is doing fine. We also find this book on cool goblin pranks, one of which is a baby swap, which seems like more of a crime than a prank, but I'll give points for style.
Oh no! Dude, no!
We finally find the Goblin King and oh god, what is happening? Okay, basically in order to convince the Goblin King to let us go, we tell him a story, which is about how we're super stressed out and being king is hard. Could you please let me go, please? This works, and we go back home safe and sound. We cut to Gwendolyn's room getting infested by rats, which literally has nothing to do with anything else going on in this chapter. I guess the moral of the story was kind of about understanding what you were really afraid of and making terms with that, but I don't understand how holding this very cute rat solves Gwendolyn's fear of thunder. So yeah, if we do the bow and then the rose and then the pea, we get a fucking coconut bomb.
Right. Obviously, my bad.
I honestly, I'm a little embarrassed for you that you didn't.
Some of these puzzles in this game are so, obtuse. I don't know if that's the word, but it's just like...
No, obtuse is the word.
It's like, bro, where did you even come up with that?
And that's the episode. While I did enjoy the puzzling in this chapter, all the narrative was essentially left to the beginning and end of the chapter, and while it's not really bad in any tangible way, it is kind of underwhelming. I do enjoy Graham's arc of having to confront his fears of letting his kingdom down in the shadow of Jaqcues' death, and there's a certain amount of the dorkiness and youthful outlook from the first chapter Graham you can see every now and then, so there's sort of a feeling of character progression. Additionally, I couldn't find a better place to talk about this, but starting from this episode onward, you can skip cutscenes, which I really appreciate because it's easy to get a repeat cutscene. Though, as far as I can tell, this does not retroactively apply to episode 1, but I also didn't test it because I'm a hack reviewer. While I don't think this chapter is bad by any means, I do think it's a poor follow-up to the last chapter. I will discuss this more elaborately at my end-of-game summary, but the thing that sort of sticks with me in this chapter is that Acorn and Whisper are only ever mentioned in passing, optionally. Even Larry and Kyle have more presence. I don't dislike the shopkeepers, but like, why do I, Mr. Writer, care about these people beyond basic human decency? My relationship with both Acorn and Whisper started off very difficult, and I had to put work into repairing those relationships by paying attention to what they care about and showing care in times of need. And then they regarded me as a friend. The game stopped in its tracks for half an hour to make sure I got to know all of the night hopefuls, so my relationship to them felt a lot more important than my relationship to the shopkeepers, as my relationship to them is just, I give them money and they paragraph at me for the way I handled my night tournament experience. My relationship to them felt a lot more artificial because they are bound so closely to the 3 different virtues that they feel like more of a gauge of how many good boy points I have than anything. I sort of took it for granted that Acorn and Whisper were going to have a much stronger presence than they ever did because of their roles in the first chapter. I mean, even the fucking merchant got to be here. I know it sort of seems that I'm complaining about this chapter not being something that it isn't, and in the game's defense I am a little bit, and for the record, I don't think this chapter's bad on its own terms, I just think it's representative of a bigger problem we're going to start seeing a lot of. Again, put a pin in it. Hey guys, it's me from the future again. I wanted to say before getting into this intermission that I get kind of heated, and in fact through the rest of the video I will be getting heated in certain spots, and I'm sort of conflicted about that. On the one hand, this video serves in part as a review, and I think it's very easy for reviewers to not only get sucked into the negative aspects and make them bigger than they are, but to do so with a sort of fervor that is performative and can lead to assuming intent. And to some extent I do think I am guilty of that in the sections to come. On the other hand, however, this is also a video about my experience with this game in engaging with its narrative, and the truth is that I think this game's overarching narrative just isn't very strong, which I find very disappointing since I don't think it's hard to see what could have been. And I do think there's some true emotion in the way I carry myself going forward through this video. Like, I know I used the word performative earlier, but that wasn't me saying I'm being insincere, more that I'm expressing myself in a way that I think is most interesting. But unfortunately, I think that comes at the sacrifice of clarity, as well as a certain degree of refusing extensions of goodwill, even though I was trying to be conscientious of that as I wrote. I've been working on this video for over a year now, so naturally my thoughts and feelings will change, as well as my approach towards creative projects such as this and how I feel about them. And I'm in the stage where it's like, I'm not fully satisfied with what the final product is shaping up to be, but I also don't know how to make it better. And even more than that, if I start getting to the point of revising every word I'm unsatisfied with, I'm never gonna finish this video. So the best way I can think to rectify this is to just let this video suck a little bit, because making things that suck a little bit is how you grow as a creative. And instead of rebuilding the video from the ground up, I will instead take a moment here to appreciate the hard work that went into this game. While King's Quest does have many flaws, those flaws took effort and were created with some thought process or another with the intention of making a good final product. And I do still see the creative spark that drove this game even during the parts I really don't like, and even when I recognize the way it falls short. All of that said, let's get back into it. Just remember that though I do get heated, it doesn't like matter that this game falls flat in certain ways, despite how intense I get about it, and that I do ultimately respect the developers for making a whole game and sharing it with the world. It's hard to make stuff, and the process of caring about a thing you made is inherently vulnerable and scary, but these were people willing to put in the effort and give it their best shot, and that is always worth celebrating. So there's a part of me that wants to save this section for later in the video and surprise you all with it and see how many people catch it as it's happening, but we're just going for it. We're going to talk about this game's relationship with choices. Now, you might be thinking this is a weird place to talk about this, as we still have several more episodes to go, and if so, I agree. It would be insincere to say there are no more choices the player gets to make after this episode, but that's only on technicality, because in the next episode, you get to choose your wife, and that's it. There's certain aspects of this conversation I'm going to save for the conclusion when I discuss this game in its broader context, but there's a particular emphasis on choices that this sort of episodic game calls for, to the point where I can call something a choices matter game, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's not like this game doesn't know that's what it's doing. For one, it used this episodic format, and for another, early episodes have an extremely heavy emphasis on choice. And for a third, it specifically pointed out its inspirations. We could spend a lot of time talking about what it means for a choice to matter in these sorts of games, and I think that's a bigger discussion discussion than I want to cover in this video, but I think no matter how you slice it, the way this game executed is kind of bad. This game set a very clear precedent of choices largely falling along the axis of choosing one of these three virtues, and the first episode plays it straight the whole way through. Episode 2 plays with these different virtues by having the characters representing the different virtues adopt techniques from other virtues in order to help with the escape after their go-to technique doesn't work out. The Hufflepuffs decide to make a bomb in order to break out a bravery tactic, allegedly. The Fays attempt to poison the goblin guards with chunder blossoms, a wits tactic, and Amaya lowers a goblin's guard by offering a hug, a compassion tactic. And then after this episode, all mentions of these different virtues are token efforts. I've heard people argue that this actually makes sense because Graham has grown up and become assured of who he is and doesn't need to make these choices anymore, and like, whatever helps you sleep at night, but for me this doesn't make it better. I would need the game to make a point of demonstrating that that's what it's trying to do, and considering we have Graham here to narrate his thoughts, that would be easy. But more importantly, there's no way that this was the intention of the game. It feels like they just got bored of their own gimmick, as even if Graham's path is assured, Gwendolyn's is not, so she should still be influenced by the path you chose, but she isn't. They would not call so much attention to choices in episodes 1 and 2 if they knew that in the last 3 episodes they would stop doing it entirely. I'm not mad that this game doesn't have choices with consequences despite following Telltale's 5-episode structure. I'm mad that they started doing it and then stopped. When they released episode 1, I don't think they had anything but the barest plan about what the other episodes were going to be, and they were not prepared for that uncertainty. Y'all can shit on Telltale all you want, but at least they had follow-through. The choices might not always have meant very much, and the stories might have been weak, but at least they never just dropped all pretense because they got bored or didn't know what to do. And on that note, I do feel the choices in this game, when they do exist, are really shallow. And like, I know people are always on that shit if choices don't matter, and I think people can be a little dramatic on that point with other games, but boy do these choices not matter. Like, the biggest consequence of your actions are what nickname Ulfie calls you, and that in the first episode the shop owners will give you shit about your choices, which will in no way meaningfully impact their behavior outside of just letting you know. And after this episode, you don't even interact with other shopkeepers outside of your own chosen route. Oh, and I guess it changes how Gwendolyn handles her own problems, but, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, who gives a shit? We'll get back to that. Not only that, but as a person who specifically went the compassion route, I think I do some things that are not compassionate. I lie, I cheat, I steal, I non-consensually mind control. These are things I not only would not choose to do, but I feel largely fall under a wits action more than a compassion action, though honestly, wits is more about being duplicitous than being smart. I think that trickery would be a way better name for it. I get that trickery isn't really considered a virtue, but honesty is. And you do have to physically fight Manny at the end of chapter 1 no matter what. The compassion choice just requires me to use a pie, as if using a goofy weapon makes it a less violent encounter. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? This literally changes nothing besides the animation. It will not impact my relationship with anyone. It will not impact how Manny treats me, nor his fate. It will not impact my reputation. So like, why are we even doing this, man? I understand choices are kind of a staple in this episodic format, but if you don't know what you're doing with it and have no meaningful consequences for it, why even implement them in the first place? If you can't tell, I wrote this section a few episodes down the line where I'm a little less nice. We start with an interesting time-bending puzzle where we save baby Cedric the Owl from certain doom via plans. It's an imaginative puzzle, though I have no idea why it's here, and it literally never comes up again. It also wants to accuse me of intentionally killing Cedric after a few tries, when I'm just trying to figure out the puzzle, man. I get it's a meme to hate on Cedric, but I ain't that bitch. I would not let baby Cedric die. The story of this chapter takes place 8 years and some change after the last one, and Graham has started to come onto his own as king, but unfortunately, while the kingdom is doing better, Graham himself is quite lonely at dinner, and no one seems interested or able to join, despite his now buff physique.
Graham's waist fucking snatched. Like, they really fucking gave him his fucking cunt bills.
Cunt bills? I think they call that estrogen.
I was just like, I'm like, they gave him estrogen.
Yeah. So lonely, in fact, that he doesn't even seem to feel embarrassed about constructing a dinner guest right in front of this garden god. Also, I could not find any guides that would clearly state how to construct Chesterette. IGN's guide doesn't even go past the second chapter, so I spent like 5 minutes trying to figure out how to make this guard give me peas. How do I make a dinner guest?
I don't know. Why would anybody have ever thought of this ever?
I don't know. I'm looking it up because fuck me, I don't care. I'm so sorry you're sad, Graham.
Me too. people say like, oh, pigs can't look up, so they never see the sky. And I'm like, bro, what the fuck do you mean by that? They still got eyes, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
They can look to the horizon. You stupid fuck.
I really wish these guys would be a little bit more specific. Just tell me the thing I'm doing. I think I'm the only person who has ever played the game this far. I fucking must be. I guess. Give me the fucking peas, I guess.
Well, you pee.
Would you?
No, it's fucking...
Well,
no,
You can't even pee?
I can't pee, it's true. No, he doesn't want peas. Right. Do I have to go here and tell you to refill the...
What good is all this food going to share it with?
Hey, the
Video game!
Video game. Hey, the peas have peed.
Bro, put the peas down! Bro.
The peas, they need...
It worked for a king.
I'm trying! Do I go over here? Now it would be like, hey, peas? Hey, peas?
Pee.
Beep, 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 beep.
Looks like you can use that napkin for a hat.
Oh, you're so right! You're so right! You are so right. God.
Yeah!
It's the peas.
How do you request the pea replenishing?
Give me peas. I want peas. Look, I'm fresh out of fucking peas, dude. I need more. I am desperate for peas.
What the fuck, dude?
How do I pee? Fuck.
Oh no, dude.
Shit.
You should be able to click that plate of peas. I don't get it.
Give me the peas.
Do something with your inventory. Put the Chester in the peas.
The peas! Ma'am! Do I have to trick him into eating the peas with the meat?
Why trick him into eating the peas?
Maybe then it will count. Do you think this guard's watching this and is just like, oh no? Mortified by this shameful display, the magic mirror tells Graham to go anywhere but here, and so Graham goes to this tower on a mission for his future wife. The story is interrupted by some of present Graham's nursemaids coming in, so Graham asks the kids to give him 30 minutes. This wait ends up lasting 4 hours, much to Gwendolyn's worry, but Gart does his best to keep her mind on other things, such as on Queen Valanice's birthday. Speak of the devil, Valanice shows up to ask Gwendolyn to come see Graham. Gwendolyn asks to bring Gart, but Valanice rejects this on account of not wanting to overwhelm Graham. Gart gets moody about Gwendolyn clearly being Graham's preferred grandchild, and starts talking like he has some sort of evil scheme up his sleeve, rather than being a preteen who wants his grandfather's attention. We see Graham alone in his room, asking the magic mirror for one last adventure, only to get back his reflection. But don't worry, well, I gotta be honest, he might be dying. Gwendolyn arrives, and Graham offers to tell Gwendolyn a story about anything she wants. Gwendolyn asks to learn more about Valanice, since she has yet to buy her a birthday present and wants to learn what she likes. So Graham tells the story of how he met her. That's right, gamers, this is when the reimagining goes full reimagine. These incredible feats of athleticism! Lady! Oh, check this out! Graham scales the tower, presses F to pay respects because God forbid we let that one go, and meets 2 girls! Honestly, I'm surprised they had the restraint for 2. Graham has been a little lonely. Hello, I am so sad and so desperate. Please have sex with me.
I made a woman out of a picture of an old man, some peas, and a rug.
And she wasn't sexy.
No.
So he decides to propose to one of them on the spot, and I chose Greenie because my sibling liked her design more. And it's such a girl in the tower moment, but she rejects us because this is a red flag. Do not do this. Graham immediately pivots to Pinky, who obviously also rejects this.
Venturing rope?
You know, rope for adventure.
Like a rope. It's exactly what it's for my penis.
If it isn't, I have no idea what to do.
Yeah, we're not getting out of here.
These 2 princesses are best friends and from royal families on opposite ends of Kalima. Greenie over here is Princess V.
Is V short for something?
Yes, it is.
Oh, brother, get it together! Short for Valanice. Pinky is Princess Niece, which is also short for Valanice. V is all about being smart. She reads the same finished puzzle book 3 times a year, apparently, so she is surely nerdier than you. Niece, meanwhile, is all about adventure and whimsy, to the point where she thinks it's totally reasonable for Graham to say he came up here looking for a unicorn, even though he very clearly didn't, and is just copying her, and gets cold if he's honest and says he came up here because a magic mirror told us our true love would be in this tower, which is obviously what we came here to find. We also learn of a magic barrier around the tower, and no one can leave the barrier except through, you guessed it, true love. The princesses are then visited by their captor, Hagatha. We try to keep hidden, but we are eventually found by her. Luckily, she's cool with us being here on account of deciding we are a princess.
It's the estrogen.
So we play some board games with the princesses, which basically amounts to us answering questions so that we agree with one another, and the first to 3 win.
I'd want to be a dragon with a pet dragon. Is that weird?
I think that's slavery, Gwendolyn. Why do people not like the smell of syrup in this universe?
Turn your head the other
Let the
way.
orphan keep the coin, obviously.
The orphan needs that money more than the merchant does.
I chose A. I figured that honesty would be rewarded with more than just one shiny...
You don't know the merchants, I know.
I know.
The gremlin racism is really severe in this world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in Daventry, we actually have a kill-on-sight order for gremlins.
Yeah.
I've been trying to repeal it, but I've just been so busy with my girlfriend.
Yeah.
We win with Nice because our honest answers just kind of lined up with her more. We then get some time to explore the tower, finding Hagatha's room, which includes this magic canvas that shows that Hagatha was once a very conventionally attractive young woman, but her overuse of potions to maintain that appearance somehow led to her becoming a scaly. I'd still give her a little kiss, and hey, the magic mirror never told me Hagatha wasn't my destined true love, but for some reason the game doesn't let me go for it, foiled once again by the gay sex button not working. We also discover this clock thing, which Hagatha can use to send the princesses out to run errands. And, check this out, we can also use it to leave the tower for a limited time using these photos we collected earlier. We asked the Fays for some dating advice and a recipe. They offer both. We peace out. We give V a pie and play this puzzle box with her. Oh, also, while we were out, we took Manny's picture. I don't know why I need this, but that's never stopped me before. And used it on the canvas to learn he's a goblin. That's cool and all, but like, this doesn't change anything? Sure, it's unexpected and surprising, but Manny being a goblin is as meaningfully surprising as Samus being a girl. It's not what audiences were expecting, but it doesn't recontextualize the character or add a new layer to their actions or personality. It's literally just unexpected. This doesn't explain a plot hole either. Manny was baby swapped, he was raised by humans. Him being able to write in goblin and having a familiarity with their culture is no different than if he were a human and raised by humans. He knows these things because he took the time to learn them. So I don't really understand why the game goes out of its way to pat itself on the back for this plot twist.
Nice twist.
It's not like it doesn't make sense, or that it makes the story worse, or it wasn't foreshadowed. It's just kind of a nothing burger. While the game does use the information of Manny being a goblin to inform his character from this point on, it doesn't meaningfully recontextualize that which came before. Anyway, then we get a cutscene of this guy, Morden, visiting Hagatha for an appearance-altering potion for his boss, who is definitely Manny. This is the human raised by goblins from the last episode, by the by. He also returns a book on taming dragons to Hagatha, which I'm sure won't come up again. I put that line in as a joke, but we never actually see the dragon again despite this foreshadowing.
Did somebody see Princess Ball?
No! Who are you? Listen, I won't lie to you. I would never lie to you. This fucking sucks. It goes on for entirely too long, and the only fun thing about it is that Graham's cape is nice to look at when he spins.
I'm confused about what's happening here.
We're standing and looking at each other.
I don't know if this is supposed to happen.
Oh! Moved by this beautiful performance, Hagatha realizes she kind of has everything she wants in this tower and doesn't want to lose it, and thus commits to making a frost tonic so she can keep everything exactly the way she wants it by freezing it. By the way, if it feels like we are sort of aggressively and gracelessly cutting between scenes, that's because we kind of are. The pacing of this episode is odd, presumably because they're skipping over large swaths of time to get to all of their story beats and to help the romance plot feel more natural. And I won't say it's not working, but it does result in a choppy feeling. After the first few scenes, I had absolutely no sense of where I was narratively. Anyways, cut to the next scene, and Hagatha decides she trusts us enough to have us run errands for her, but she accidentally sends us into the Dragon's Well instead, where Manny and Morden are living together and working on some sort of nebulous plan. We learned that Morden is somewhat resentful of Manny and the life he got to live with his parents, whereas Morden lived in considerably worse conditions. Manny counter-argues that while Morden's life was less than ideal, he was still taken in by the goblins and raised by them, but they have considerably worse living conditions than humans, largely owing to their lack of education. Manny then discloses that that's why he wanted to be king. He wanted to prove that a goblin is just as valuable and capable a person as a human, but lacked opportunity, and he wanted to be treated as an intelligent individual without having to hide his face. And yeah, I'm kind of with Manny on this one, but we'll have to put a pin in that. Cut to the present, my bitch wife nags me about taking my medicine. Back to the story, we cut to later where Hagatha sends us on a quest for the golden acorn with Nice. We get sent to Avalon, and Nice geeks out about going on an adventure together and ends up rolling down this hill. We follow along, and I do a very good job helping her not get thorned, I promise.
That was in your ass?
And he put it back! We then build a car together to get over this gap, which works super well, and then get caught in a trap, where we are reunited with Queen Madeline of Avalon. She leads us to the acorn, and the squirrels teach us a little song. Side note, I love their chattering. It's very cute. We then cut to later once again, and we go with V to get an hourglass. We end up in Tamalore, where the Hobblepots are vacationing after they retired and sold the shop off to Acorn. And it occurs to me now that I must have been in this tower for months at this point if the Hobblepots retiring is news to me. I can only assume Larry and Kyle really have the place on lock, though. I mean, I've been gone for months, and Manny doesn't even seem to be aware the throne is just vacant and walking distance. Anyway, the Hobblepots are doing just fine. We murder some goblins, which I feel really good about doing, and then V unquicksands us, even though my idea was also smart.
She's gonna fucking love this, dude.
Yeah, she's gonna want to fuck me so bad after this.
I think it's just dumping the sand back in.
Is that the type of logic you think will help your training?
No, this was really awesome. My idea rocked, and your idea was lame and bad. So
Very clever.
I loosened it for you.
Yeah, I loosened it for you, yeah. And I puzzled this puzzle to prove my idea was good. Never emasculate me like that again. Check this shit out. We puzzle again, and then we fight over this hourglass before kissing on accident. Once we return to the tower, V and I see if our newfound love will let us break through the barrier, which it doesn't, causing V to leave in distress. We lag behind and hear someone else come up, none other than my main man, Whisper. He was apparently sent to the tower to rescue us, though Graham, for reasons I cannot possibly fathom, tells Whisper he's fine and doesn't need rescuing, even though he clearly does. Maybe it's because Whisper isn't entirely understanding of our newfound gender fluidity. Upon learning that there are women here and that Graham is trying to romance one of them, he offers some advice that Graham describes as bad, but I describe as based.
Well, why can't you just have two queens?
And even helps us write a love poem that I would indeed describe as bad.
Our love looks like a lovely owl, and your eyes are like cheddar. Love, Graham.
However, Whisper can't keep it down to save his life and risk waking up the princesses, so he decides to hide as to not interfere with Graham's prospects. And this is when we learn Whisper can actually just leave the barrier because, as far as magic law itself is concerned, Whisper's love for himself both counts and is true enough. After this, Graham decides to confront Hagatha by bringing her a box of her old things, and learns that she was shunned by her parents as a child and locked away due to her magic powers, and that she's just as limited by the spell of the tower as everyone else, and has never been able to leave due to never finding love. Graham suggests that, though the world is scary and imperfect, it is worth seeing and experiencing, and she should try to muster up the confidence and self-love to do so. Hagatha is willing to try, despite being very nervous. When she asks for words of encouragement, Graham gives her Whisper's awful poem, which he concludes is the nicest thing anyone's ever said about her. You poor woman! Inspired by this, Hagatha attempts to walk out the door but can't, and concludes she simply isn't ready. So, Graham takes her hand so she doesn't have to do it alone, and with his support, she's finally able to leave. And I really like this scene, but I'm gonna wait to talk about it until my end of episode wrap-up because the tower is exploding into ice! I couldn't add any more pizzazz to it than that, I don't know why. Hagatha brings out her adventuring rope so we can climb up the tower and save the princesses, and the two are able to walk out together due to the strength of their friendship. However, while leaving, Nice gets her wrist pinned under a giant icicle and initially intends to sacrifice herself to save V, but V comes back for her. Everyone is able to leave, though Nice does suffer some severe damage to her hand.
Oh, girl.
Oh!
That's not good. Not for first I thought she was like bad.
Dear girl, you're not hiding that! We cut back to the present and see Graham and V enjoying breakfast together, and Gwendolyn gives V the gift of a puzzle box with a little hourglass inside of it. We also get this Manny arm foreshadowing moment. Going into this episode, I had this sort of trepidation that this chapter was going to uncritically replicate the sort of 2014 pop feminism idea of a princess and fairy tale love stories, and there's nothing wrong with 2014 pop feminism. I just think those specific tropes could be very repetitive in the way they were implemented, and this chapter does have its fun with them, but I felt like the writing team was actually interested in engaging with those ideas on more than a surface level. This is most obvious in the handling of the subject of true love, with the spell that keeps everyone who enters the tower trapped unless they find true love. As with many contemporaries, such as Frozen, the idea that a meaningfully romantic relationship between Graham and one of the princesses could exist right after meeting is mocked heavily, and care is taken to show that it took a lot of time before they started a relationship, and longer still until they got married, but the metaphor of the spell allows them to say a lot more than just true romantic love takes time. It also uses the metaphor to establish the love from a friend as equally important, and as just discussed, it used this metaphor to explore the importance of self-love and self-confidence and the fact that it's really hard to build that up when you've been down on yourself for so long. And the way it's done is not alone. You need the support of other people to learn to care for yourself. Often the saying goes that you need to love yourself in order for anyone to love you, but well, people aren't made to go it alone, and building yourself up is a lot easier when you have a support system. I really like this scene for this reason. I think it's just very sweet that Graham is willing to help her out, and she's very grateful for that support. It's just nice. I left this episode feeling really good. V and Neef are quite likable as characters and love interest. I think it's really easy in romance stories to forget about like personalities, but they both come across as very charming in their own ways. Overall, I think this episode has some serious issues with pacing. The jumps between scenes were quite aggressive, but barring that, I think this episode, narratively speaking, is a definitive step up from episode 2. Hey guys, me from the future, back with a vengeance. So I thought for this intermission that it would be funny if I tried to make the sugar shroom pie from episode 1, because mushrooms in a berry pie seems funny, but not so horrible that I would just throw it out. But honestly, I think everything together was just sort of boring to watch. The execution just wasn't there on pretty much every front. I never even explained what I was trying to do, so here's my reaction to my pie, I guess. This episode begins with a scene of V waking up Graham to take care of their twin children, Rosella and Alexander. We change a diaper.
I can do this. Are you sure you're not awake, Valenice?
Pull it together, Graham.
Get a grip.
You're right. We feed, and we sing Alexander to sleep. Hard cut to the guards outside who are doing a comedy bit before Manny, now an old man, comes into the castle and actually murders several of them. But Larry and Kyle have been double-handedly holding this kingdom down, so I have every confidence in them to get the situation under control.
Holy shit, tornado? Larry, Kyle, tornado?
Holy shit!
I don't even know what kind of matching you could.
Oh, fuck, did they kill Larry? Bro!
They're boyfriends, and one of them's dead.
This is homophobia. No! What do you mean?
It's probably just knocked out. Nobody's died in this game, really.
Chaka fucking died.
Oh shit, Chaka died!
You know, I do respect this game for not chickening out with the potential for danger and for being willing to kill off a character more than once. That said, killing Larry independently of Kyle is fucked up, and you can tell Kyle's really upset about it too. With Larry fucking dead, Manny breaks into Graham and V's room, reintroduces himself by his full name, Manannan, and explains to Graham that he is going to kidnap Alexander to serve as his slave, and then, when the time comes, he will bring Alexander back to claim the throne so that, and I shit you not, Alexander can create a kingdom that is better for all species. Graham tells Manannan he will give him whatever he wants in exchange for the safety of his son, up to and including the throne, but Manannan says no. He could easily just kill Graham if he wanted that, but he specifically wants Graham's child to feel the suffering of being rejected by the world. He went into this saying that this didn't have anything to do with Graham, but I think stealing someone's kid to enslave and abuse them because they beat you at chess once is kind of personal, especially since this bit of revenge is far more convoluted a plot than your actual stated goal. Again, he could easily just kill Graham. So, okay, this is a lot. Let us take a moment to sort through all this. In the original series, Manannan is an evil human wizard who is the primary antagonist for the third game exclusively. Manannan normally kept slaves, and he enslaved Alexander as revenge on Hagatha's behalf after Graham rescued Valenice from her. And, you know, he needed a new one anyway. Alexander turns Manannan into a cat during his escape, and from there on, Manannan only shows up in bit roles in other games. Now, as I've said, I'm only passingly familiar with the source material, and I have no inherent issue with taking huge liberties with adaptational changes. I bring all this up not to shame the fact that it's different, but to give some context as to why this whole enslavement thing is happening. Manannan, in the original source material, is an antagonist for one game out of like 8, and clearly this game wanted a primary antagonist to carry throughout all of these episodes, so like, sure, why not Manannan? But it just feels like such a jump to go from cheating at chess, allegedly, to enslaving a child. It feels like they did not fully bridge the gap between these two plot points. I guess he did manipulate the goblins into kidnapping a bunch of humans, but this still feels way more extreme. And it feels very weird to have his motivations be, I want goblins to be treated as equals to humans and have the same access to resources, especially since this plot point is completely an invention of the 2015 game. And like, yeah, that's a based and noble goal, but I just feel like there's a lot of other things that he could have done before enslaving a child about it. I'm just gonna put a pin in this. There's a lot going on here, and I haven't even touched on, like, the fact he transformed himself into a human. There's so much to dig into with that, but later. I will address it, but later. V and Graham go to search for Alexander, during which V mentions niece has not been responding to her messages lately, and the search turns up nothing. We then jump to 18 years in the future, with Graham still on the hunt for Alexander, needing to be forced into sorting through addendums with V and Rosella. And then Alexander just shows up. Jump to the present, Graham and V are working together to get Graham's affairs in order, with Graham in denial of his failing health. He calls Gart in, isn't able to tell Gart what's going on, and asks him to deliver a letter to get an addendum change. He then calls in Gwendolyn, who is sad because Gart hasn't been speaking to her for the past few days, and Graham tells Gwendolyn the story of Alexander's return to help cheer her up. Jumping back into the story, Graham is showing Alexander around town, only Alexander actually doesn't want to be called that, and instead suggests Caduceus, though he's not totally sure how he feels about it yet. Graham doesn't really get it, but he does his best to be supportive. We take Caduceus to meet the Fays. They're excited to see the missing princess found, and give us a little update on their own son, who has left to become a tailor. Wendy offers Caduceus a hug, but he's clearly uncomfortable with the idea, so Wendy talks himself out of the hug as if he has an addiction, which is sort of a lame bit. We pick up objectively too many pies for our family vacation, and Caduceus tries pie for the first time. Completely unrelated, but I really like Caduceus's voice. I think it's because it gives me a Rory Manser vibe.
Well, of course I know what a pie is. I've just never eaten one before. Manannan never served sweets.
Unpopular opinion, or at least unpopular amongst the people editing Y2K's YMMV page on TV tropes, but despite literally everything, I love Rory. I love his voice. It sells the angsty teenness of it all for me, and Caduceus's voice just has that same effect for me. Is it wrong that I'm actually kind of excited for the 1.5 update? Part of me just really wants to believe they'll pull it off. I don't know. I might do a Let's Play or something when it comes out, if that sounds interesting. Even if it's still bad, I'll at least know what I'm in for, and I'm curious about the changes. I want it to succeed. I don't know. Something about the meta-narrative of redeeming that shit game fucking gets to me. I want it to happen. I haven't even looked at the demo because I'm scared. Is it good? Is it promising? Don't tell me. Anyway, I pack some luggage like a boss and we make our way to sunny Tamalore.
Did someone say I'm going?
Oh, no.
I'm going on an adventure, and I'll bring woven socks from Acorn.
This sucks. So we get to Tamalore, and it's about as not sunny as it could possibly get, but Graham is undisturbed by this owing to a godlike level of willful ignorance. We check into our room, and by room I do of course mean puzzle labyrinth that immediately steals our wife and daughter away and locks them in an ice tower. Or at least that's what God's cuntiest Sphinx tells us, and I'm taking their word for it because the game didn't have the budget to show us that. Graham is still, for some reason, heavily unbothered by any of this. He certainly would like his wife and daughter back. This is a family vacation after all, but Graham seems more excited about solving puzzles than, you know, acknowledging the fact his family has been kidnapped, a thing that famously upsets him. Granted, solving the puzzle labyrinth will get him to his family either way, but it just feels so odd considering how broken up he was about his son nearly 2 decades later. Does this truly pull up nothing for you? And when I say puzzles, I don't mean adventure game puzzles, I mean slider puzzles. For 40 minutes. Maybe it's because we took a 3-month break in recording and this is what we came back to. Maybe it's because Graham is at his most unlikable and unbelievable. Or maybe it's because this is just by far the longest stretch of unimaginative nothing task we've been subjected to. But this whole section is easily the worst, by a mile. Even Caduceus thinks this is a boring waste of time. It's a shame because I do think, narratively speaking, there was a lot of interesting things to talk about in this section. And I really want to emphasize that if I'm struggling to make it through gameplay, even for a narrative I find interesting, that That is a very bad sign. I beat Lobotomy Corporation with 100% abnormality dissolution. That took me 200 hours, and a solid 60% of that was so brain dead I could actually read or play other games while waiting to do something, and I loved it. But Lobotomy Corporation wasted my time with respect. It had a point it was getting to with its grind. This just feels phoned in. Anyway, Graham is using this whole puzzle labyrinth situation to try and bond with Caduceus, as Graham and the family as a whole really love puzzles, and he wants to introduce Caduceus to that tradition.
This puzzle is so fucking hard. Yeah, I mean, I'm fucking stumped, frankly.
You really wanted Alexander to wake up his bestie.
Yeah. Be good at puzzles or I'll disown you.
Caduceus doesn't really get it, though, and isn't super into it, so eventually Graham forces him to participate by making him push around blocks for him. Caduceus says this:
"You are doing so great, it's like you were born for this."
Oh, trust me. I'm good at following orders.
Which I think speaks for itself how well that's going.
Okay, these two go there.
Okay.
And then he goes back.
Oh, you are so smart. You are so smart.
I love puzzles.
I should have been Caduceus.
Yeah.
I needed to do my laundry so bad.
Do it.
Oh my god, I hate laundry. I would rather fucking milk a fucking dead cow.
Wow.
Sorry.
Come on, Alexander, do it with some feeling.
Of course, Dad.
Oh, that was the sad feeling.
Yeah, really, yeah. So are you trying to think?
A little bit.
There's wolves in this room for some reason. Caduceus handles the wolves by feeding them leftover cat cookie, which Graham disapproves of as he feels this solution is underhanded and unfairly subverts the intended challenge of the puzzle.
Manny tried to cheat his way, and mine, into the knighthood.
So you admit it! Me personally, I think all's fair in not getting eaten by wolves, intended challenge or not, and the Sphinx even agrees magical solutions are perfectly valid. During one puzzle, Graham notices a faraway spot that needs to be hit, and so decides to give Caduceus a Jaqcues bow, ignoring the fact these writers just cannot let the poor man rest in peace, to pay respects, and the fact that they make the mistake of reminding me of a far better execution of this gameplay concept. I do like Graham correcting Caduceus' form in the same way a Jaqcues once corrected his to contrast the success of their bonding with Graham's failure to connect with Caduceus. Still failing to make the shot, Caduceus decides to solve the puzzle with a fireball, which really upsets Graham not only because he has a hard time disconnecting magic from Manny, but the snapping that summons the spell is actually a trigger for Graham that reminds him of the night Caduceus was kidnapped. Graham asks Caduceus to not use magic, which he reluctantly agrees to, though unfortunately snapping is actually a nervous habit of Caduceus's, which he tries to stop doing for Graham's sake. Graham does say this about it:
Alexander, please. That sound is bringing me back to a very dark place.
And I'm not saying Graham should ignore his own needs and boundaries, but it does feel sort of condescending to describe it like that to your long-lost son who spent the last 18 years enslaved and abused as punishment for being your child. I'm sure he knows a thing or two about dark places.
If I be so for real, this game, so far, not the best one that I have ever played.
Yeah.
It's very meh.
Yeah, it's got a lot of meh going on.
Yep.
God damn it, I have to restart the whole thing? Come on. Yeah, I'm with Alexander on this one. Y'all could have just used some fireballs and this would have been way easier.
Graham tries some puns and encourages Caduceus to get in on it, which Caduceus isn't really into, but does his best to humor Graham, and he gets upset Graham isn't really into his not pun joke.
This is not what I want. Not what I want. I've just got to say, I do not understand.
Sometimes it has to get worse before it can get better.
Like this story.
It is worse, yeah. I'm gonna be so for real, this is too many damn puzzles. This better be the last fucking one. I'm sick of this shit.
Yeah, me too, man.
I'm not even doing it.
After what is definitely too many puzzles, we get to the last room, which Graham is so geeked about it causes him to unleash every last ounce of excitement he has for Caduceus' return, and the many ideas he had of who Caduceus would be and how they would bond, which Caduceus finds frustrating. He blows up the place and Graham tells him off and forbids him from using magic.
I'm not like you. I can't handle any more puzzles.
And neither can I.
Caduceus is not having it, as he sees magic as a part of himself, and he rejects the idea of belonging to the family just because he's back. Graham asks him why he even came back then, and Caduceus answers that he wanted a father, not a commander.
Please don't ever compare me to that man.
He robbed you of your childhood.
Well, like it or not, Dad, I'm already grown up. And you're robbing me of my adulthood.
You shouldn't talk to your father that way, Alexander.
Look, I don't even know that name. Let's just split up and search for the girls. You have your way of doing things, and I have mine. I'm just slowing you down.
Overall, I do find this conflict of the two adjusting to having one another in their lives to be an interesting one. I do think Graham is sort of a bastard in this situation, since I really think he could and should be more understanding of Caduceus' circumstances, especially since Caduceus is trying to fit in with Graham's expectations. To a certain extent, Graham's meant to be seen as in the wrong, as Gwendolyn asks him why he couldn't just let Alexander do magic, and Graham says that, at the time, he wasn't able to reconcile the reality of who his son is with the person he had imagined him as, though his desire to change his tendency towards underhanded tactics is left unchallenged, even though it is allowed by the rules, Graham. But like, Caduceus isn't just navigating young adulthood and reconnecting with lost and unfamiliar family after a lifetime apart. He is doing so after having literally just escaped a world that consisted only of him and a man who used him as a prop for punishment. I know I keep repeating things to that effect, but I really don't know how else to communicate what a miserable existence Caduceus lived through. To be completely isolated from others and live in fear of the only person keeping you alive, and then to escape and find his family only for his dad to belittle the only way he's ever found any power and push him around on what was supposed to be a relaxing family vacation. I think Caduceus shows a remarkable degree of patience considering. While Graham does want to connect with him and does try to be understanding of Caduceus' differences, it's like, I don't know, maybe instead of a family trip, you should have taken him to therapy. Anyway, put a pin in all that. My son doesn't understand my interest. I'm so sorry you're having trouble connecting to your son, your majesty, but can you get a royal fucking grip and nurture your child? We then cut to the present, where the family minus Graham are having dinner, and they're having a big dumb fight about who will be king. Mostly between Gart and Gwendolyn, who are setting table on fire pissed at each other. Though Alexander does mention that Kyle is still kicking, good for him. This happens, which is funny because it reminds me of a joke they had in the first chapter. Valanice tells everyone to go to their rooms to cool off and no one can see Graham tonight. Gwendolyn ignores this and goes to see Graham anyway, which he encourages since he can now finish the story uninterrupted. So Graham goes to solve more puzzles alone this time, and my sibling and I are extremely excited about it.
Shit, dude, those puzzles are fucking awful.
They really are.
Ugh.
Okay, what's happening?
Oh my god, bro.
I couldn't shake the feeling that they seemed like first drafts, failed attempts at some larger art project.
Like this episode.
Bro, let him get up, let him get up, let him get up.
Oh, fuck! I think I'm doing this wrong.
That's cool.
It is.
I like that about you. The fucking slowest animation for the stupidest action.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's gotta... This can't just be unfun. It has to be unfun and inconvenient.
Fuck Elden Ring. Have y'all played King's Quest? We have been here for 30 minutes. Ain't no fucking way.
Yeah. But at least this Sphinx is here to remind us about how our son doesn't love us. So after all that, as well as Gwendolyn complaining about how Gart doesn't like her anymore, we make it to the top of the ice tower and meet the freakishly textured Ice Queen Isabella, who Graham immediately identifies as niece. She refuses to acknowledge this though, and seems really burned, frozen from having been left at the tower, which is like, girl, you were out, you can leave, go home, this is not my fault. She's friends with the Sphinx and wants to trap people in her labyrinth, so they stay with her forever or something. Whatever, we're in a prison and we watch as Caduceus finally approaches the last puzzle, and Graham freaks out, not wanting him to get trapped too. And Graham realizes the best way to do this would be to fireball his way to Caduceus' puzzle, and I'm gonna play the scene that follows.
Thanks for the entertainment.
Did you find anything particularly strange about that overgrown kitty?
You mean besides the fact that it talks, thinks itself pretty clever, and is incredibly manipulative?
Mm-hmm.
Manannan.
That furball was sipping from this pile of cosmolotion.
It would appear so.
It would be irresponsible for us to leave this pile of potions here like this. I think you need to set it ablaze.
Are you sure?
You keep doing you, Alexander.
You had to make this cheesy.
You have to find the girls before the Ice Queen does.
Find who?
Thank the shining stars you're alive.
I could say the same for you.
The
Sphinx told us that you were both trapped at the top of that tower.
Oh, did he now?
Don't you mean she?
Nope. The Sphinx is Manny.
Figures.
And the Ice Queen.
Yes, I suspected as much. All the sculptures here have the essence of Nice. I knew for certain when I found this.
We need to get out of here before we all get iced.
I am not leaving without Nice.
The only way out is back through the labyrinth.
Let's solve it together this time.
So this is the one part of the video I keep rewriting mid-editing because I can't really decide how I want to express my distaste for it. I think maybe the biggest thing I missed about this episode up until now is that I think this episode knows it's half-baked. Like, I was making a joke earlier, but I think the writers genuinely knew the script lacked refinement because they didn't have time for more than a first draft, and I can feel that in this scene especially. It's hard to explain other than that this scene just feels so much like a bullet point after all the build-up to it. It rushes out everything this scene needed to accomplish with little grace and then moves on as quickly as possible. The dialogue is wooden and lacks punch. Alexander and Graham's struggles are patched over in the most cookie-cutter way without time for a real resolution, and I find it very disappointing for that reason, and the unfortunate truth is that the game never really recovers from stumbling this hard, and I think that made me really heated at the time because I had invested a lot of time and energy, and I felt like it was all for a story that stumbled hard because it had to be rushed. Anyway, the rest of the script doesn't work as well if I don't get really angry right now, so pretend this is what I said instead. This is a shitload of fart. What were they thinking? Oh, my mic! Anyway, now that the family is reunited, it's time to do puzzles together, so Rosella climbs this wall with me. For some reason, my solution is fucking stupid, though.
Why?
Also, Graham just bluntly confesses he was so wrapped up in Alexander's disappearance that he never really paid attention to Rosella. And then Alexander shows up and all he does is force him to do puzzles he doesn't like or else they'll never meaningfully connect. He's a bad father. We do yet another game of chess with V, which I die in many times, so I also consult a guide. So we have one less puzzle to do, and Graham is like, hey, why don't you just fireball your way through this one, son? And then Alexander's like, the integrity of the puzzle! So we do it. And at this point, I'm just doing whatever the guide tells me to do. So shout out to TrueAchievements.com. I probably could have done it without you, but I really didn't want to. The answer is love, by the way, because of course it is. Anyway, as we're leaving, we run into the Sphinx, who is Manny, and Isabella. Isabella doesn't want us to leave and freezes us in place. And Manny takes some time to taunt Caduceus and also Graham while he's at it, but not via Rosella. Some might say it's because they've been aggressively sidelined this whole chapter, but I think it's because Manny's a sexist. V tries to reconnect with Nice, which she's resistant to until V shows her old loot, at which point Nice snaps out of her state and goes to hug V. Oh shit! Manny fucking kills Nice. This prompts Alexander, now embracing his family-chosen name, to trick Manny into eating some cat cookie, forcing him to transform into a cat for the second time. I guess. They all leave, but not before saying goodbye to Nice's shattered body.
Oh, how sweet. Why does she look so weird?
In the present, Gwendolyn visits a sobbing Gart with a tray of deviled eggs, and she asks him what's wrong, and he gives her the letter Graham gave him earlier, changing an addendum so that Graham could choose anyone in his family to be heir, not just a male. Gwendolyn tries to console him, but he explains that's not what he's upset about, though he was being a total bitch earlier about how he deserved to be heir over Gwendolyn, so he is upset about it, just not right now. Gwendolyn continues reading to see that Graham included a waiver of the usual 30-day waiting period for addendum changes on account of his imminent death. Gart hugs Gwendolyn, saying he isn't ready for Graham to die, and she starts crying too. I like the scene because it makes me feel something besides tepid rage and aggressive boredom. I really feel for Gart in this scene. His grief feels very authentic, and it's clear that despite his attitude, he did genuinely love Graham, which kind of sucks given how much Graham clearly preferred Gwendolyn. Like, Gart doesn't express himself very well, but what kid his age does? Nurture your grandson, Graham. Nurture anybody. I hate this guy. And we get this scene where Manny asks Morden to make a potion to help undo all the cat nonsense, and Morden's like, sure, but what if I started calling myself Mordak? And I don't care. This episode's finally fucking over. Though, like, what do you mean slave name? I thought you were just raised by goblins. That's not slavery. Whatever, it's done. Episode's done. Normally I would put my conclusions here, but I think it's pretty obvious how I felt about this episode. It has a promising start with a strong premise, but it just gets so boring, and there's such a clear drop in quality. There is joy that can be found in this episode. My sibling and I genuinely enjoyed this section with a bunch of riddles.
What am I? I have a head but no arms to flail. I have no legs, yet I have a tail.
I'm gonna say a penny or coin.
Oh, coin's a good one.
I'm fit for a king and taste very sweet. Thick or thin, served for breakfast, Graham's favorite treat.
You have a pan and you have a cake. Can you make pancake? Is that crazy or what? Oh, no, wait. Well, can you put them on the altar and then come back and get another?
Oh, maybe.
Because it's like, pancake.
Yeah.
Then there's not a fucking pancake here, but there is a pan and a cake.
There is a pan and a cake, that is so true. I really hope you're right. See, you put it off to the side.
Yep.
Then I put it off
I'm
to
the shit,
side.
unfortunately.
You're kind of brilliant. I'm so glad I have you here.
I'm higher than the shining stars and greater than the land or sea. What's the one thing that's worth breaking? The bonds of family.
Can I make a guess here?
Absolutely.
Like, okay, this is just metaphorical. This is like hashtag deep. What if you put nothing on the altar?
Oh.
Because when you ask, if you ask me that, I'm like, nothing. Not a damn thing.
We'll probably die here, but let's see if it works. Oh! Damn, you're killing it! And that scene with Gart and Gwendolyn at the end is great, or at least works well, but the truth is that either this episode is here to meet a deadline, or it is so poorly constructed, it might as well have been rushed. It's not like the bones of this episode aren't there. If they had time for revisions, I think this episode would have been excellent, but they didn't, and it's not. I think of all the plot points, Isabella is easily the weakest. She's interesting conceptually, but there's nothing really to dig into beyond the base premise of her character. She's here, she dies, and that's tragic and all, but that's kind of it. I liked Nice, yet I felt nothing at her death. What did Isabella have to do with anything? She didn't have anything to do with the overarching story in a thematic sense, and she shows up in 2 scenes just to die, so why was she here? She could have just not been here, and the ice could have just been random, and Manny could have been the one to make the puzzles, and pretty much nothing would have changed. She's just kind of a waste. The puzzles are also a serious death knell to this episode too. As someone who likes puzzles, I find the ones in this episode extremely boring and frustrating. And I'm buying an adventure game, the target audience of which are logic puzzlers who love a good vibe. I should not be sitting here calling their puzzles boring. When I was talking to my sibling after this episode, they mentioned how they felt like the puzzles were less narratively relevant, and I think I have to agree. In other episodes, the puzzles were directly tied to your goals, and I think that's part of the charm of games like King's Quest. These puzzles aren't just the gameplay, but also your means of connecting to the world around you and the way you interact with the narrative. It lets you become a part of the whimsy. And often they ask you to engage with the world itself, not just the raw mechanics of the puzzle. In episode 4, these puzzles are fine on a technical level, but they're not really much better than Candy Crush but with cutscenes. You could swap them with any puzzle and it wouldn't feel any different, and that's fine, but it's not the precedent the game set for itself, nor why people are attracted to adventure games. I know my frustration with this episode is more than evident, and I've been very harsh on it, but I hope I don't come across as mean or like I'm trying to bash it, because that's not my intention. I don't think there's anything to gain on an intellectual and creative level from mindlessly harping on about how awful something is. I've had my fun insulting this episode, but the truth is that it's frustrating to see something I care about fall apart like this. And there's nothing conceptually wrong here, it's just so unbelievably weak. And speaking of... In the beginning of the episode, I mentioned how I never really played King's Quest before, but had an appreciation for its legacy. Growing up, the first 2 episodes of this game were my only real experience with the franchise, so if while growing up you really loved the original games, I can only imagine how horrible it must have felt to get something new after this long, not only in the franchise, but as a notable entry in what's become a very niche genre. And it's not only very different in many key ways from this beloved franchise, it's also bad. Because of my own memories of the first 2 episodes, I had assumed criticism was overblown and largely came from people who are going to be unhappy with any changes to the source material no matter what. And in fact, going into this project, there was a part of me hoping I could come out and be the controversial hero this game needed, to show the masses that it might have its flaws, but it's not as bad as people say. And maybe if it weren't for internet teenagers who do, of course, single-handedly control the tides of marketing and online discussion, this game would be lovingly remembered. Though, I guess while I've seen a lot of bashing, it's rated mostly positive on Steam, so I guess plenty of people liked it well enough. And it does have its good qualities, very much so, and I don't intend to discount them, but this episode just genuinely sucks so bad, and according to TV tropes, it's somehow not even the worst one. Speaking of TV tropes, let's talk about it. I love TV tropes. Whenever I finish or get invested into any sort of media, you bet I'm hitting up the TV tropes YMMV page, as it's sort of my way of digesting a piece of media after interacting with it. I did consider making fun of certain things on it a little, but honestly I don't think it's like worth the effort considering the way some of y'all fucking behave. I don't trust y'all to be grown about it, frankly. Though one day or another I will have my beef. But I do want to point something out. So somewhere in the area of episode 1 or 2, I was poking around the characters page for King's Quest and noticed one of the tropes listed under Whisper's entry was pair the spares, with the rest of the entry spoiler texted. I chose not to read it, of course, not wanting to spoil myself, but I did assume this meant that Whisper would hook up with whichever Princess Graham didn't. Well, Isabella pretty thoroughly disproves that, so I was pretty unsure who else Whisper could even be dating, so I checked. And it's Amaya? I'm sorry. What do you mean Whisper and Amaya are dating? Like, I was prepared to sort of roll my eyes about Whisper and Niece fawning over each other and dismiss it so I could talk about the real Whisper OTP, but this shit baffles me so much that I feel like I have to linger on it at least a little. Like, what could Amaya possibly be getting out of this relationship? Genuine question. Anyway, Whisper should be dating Hagatha. Right? Like, there's something about the idea of an incredibly vain and self-absorbed man falling in love with a woman who looks like a lizard monster and has no confidence in herself. Like, I mean that in the sense that I think it would be adorable for Whisper to grow in such a way where he looks past appearances and falls for someone many would call objectively ugly because he enjoys the character of her soul. But I also think it would be cool if Whisper was just unbelievably fucking horny for Hagatha, dude. But also, it was Whisper's horrible poem that encouraged Hagatha to re-find joy and confidence in life, even knowing that it would be a very difficult emotional journey, and I like to think she would be able to see past Whisper's bravado and see the sweet soul within. It literally makes so much sense. They could both build each other up as people, and I'm genuinely kind of mad it's not canon. I'm not going to count that as a point against the game, but I just want everyone to know I had the thought. Okay, I needed that tangent. I'm in a much better mood now to tackle the last episode. So, my optimistic hope for what this last episode would be is a 2-hour-long, loose collection of puzzles centered around the fact Graham is dying that isn't very challenging, and luckily that is exactly what it is. We start off with Gwendolyn visiting Graham after the news of his impending death, and he promises he'll be around for one more adventure before telling Gwendolyn more stories.
We still haven't watched a single sunset from the Rose Garden.
Bro, not a single sunset?
He starts to tell her about one of his adventures as an elder, though the details are sort of fuzzy and switched around on account of his poor memory, and Gwendolyn has to help keep the details in place.
That's how they had to douche back in the days. They didn't even have Dasani water bottles. They just had water buckets. Yep, this is fucking queer history 101.
It's true.
King Graham put a bucket of water in his ass.
Yeah, I know. That's actually why douches are sometimes called the King Graham.
So true.
Everyone knows this.
Because he was a massive douche.
We do get one last conversation with Ulfi, who is getting up there in years himself and is struggling with his memory just as much, but he seems well and it's nice to see him off.
Is this like a metaphor for how his memory's burning?
I think so. Anyway. Whoa. Oh! The controls are reversed. There's then this scene where Graham sees that some of the woods are on fire and he has to collect his relics, which is a metaphor for how he fears for his legacy and what his people and his family will be left with, though everyone keeps telling him that what matters way more is the impact he had, which they conclude is good, even though he couldn't spare one sunset in the Rose Garden for his wife. Well, hey, the Rose Garden's lovely. It would be a nice place to watch a sunset, Graham.
Dick, that makes me so sad.
Yeah, honestly, this guy kind of fucking sucks.
Like, literally, you have a rose garden and your wife has mentioned wanting to watch a sunset from it, and you have it, and it's like, bro, that's your backyard.
It's been decades! You had decades to watch the sunset.
You didn't do it once?
You couldn't have spared one fucking sunset.
You know his, like, lady girl is, like, sitting in the castle, like, watching him from, like, a tall window, just so he can go, like, back and forth, just hobbling and not knowing where he's going, and she's like, gonna watch the sunset!
Anyway, after the fire, we get this section, which is basically a collection of cut content from other episodes with some jokes to explain why these things were cut. This is the kind of thing I would find really interesting in like a devlog, but deeply annoying as part of the actual product. I'm a very hard sell on meta humor, and this is not doing it for me, but that's just me. I don't wanna. I'm leaving. It's been weird.
Oh, don't, no! No! Oh, God, I'm here again.
So, back to this confusing whatever, Graham needs to adventure game puzzle his shit together so he can fight with Manny one last time, which he does through the power of TrueAchievements.com. We get to the bottom of the well where Mordak and Manny are fighting because Manny wants to be transformed back into a human, and Mordak's like, I'm fucking trying, dude, and Manny's kind of just being a real dick about it and dead-naming him. What's up with that? He's just being cruel. I know Manny was never nice, that's not my beef, but he was always manipulative, and the low bar for getting people on your side and agreeing with you is calling them by the name they want to be called. What is he getting out of this? Anyway, Graham comes in asking to see Manny, and Mordak's like, well, you gotta pick up this crystal first to prove your wits, and the fun thing about the crystal is that it's got fumes that make the weak of mind pass out. Graham is also not feeling well in the real world, so he takes a nap. Well, once he's alone, he gets out of bed to go on his last adventure, but he instead falls onto the floor and can't get himself back up, and it's genuinely kind of hard to watch. In pain and defeated, he starts talking to an invisible friend, accepting the fact that he has no adventure left in him, and it's his time to go after one last goodbye, with this invisible friend being the ghost of Jaqcues, because they truly cannot let him go. So back in the story, we see still passed out Graham and enter a sort of dream sequence designed in the style of older King's Quest games, which I honestly think is really charming.
I actually quite like this.
I actually also quite like this. We talk to our family about how we have to keep doing this and also talk to the dead about what legacy means.
Oh! Hey! Oh! Hey, everybody! Oh shit! Hello, guys! Oh, y'all are dead! That's sad!
This gets us back into good enough shape to confront Manny. And you know what? There's something I kind of love about this dynamic they all have, because they're all old and have some amount of respect for each other, and this feels less like the final confrontation between two epic fantasy rivals, and more like this is kind of just what they do in their retirement. Like, Manny starts going on about how he tricked Graham into giving him everything he needed for his transformation potion, but Graham was like, yeah, can you get on with it? And Manny kind of just does. He asks Graham for some beard hair for his potion, Graham agrees, they'll meet at high noon. Back in the present, Gwendolyn and Alexander find Graham on the floor and get him back into the bed. Everyone else is called in, and Graham is speedrunning going senile, so Graham asks Gwendolyn to finish the story. She suggests Gart does it instead, but Gart says it should be her, and so despite not really knowing how the story ends, Gwendolyn makes up an ending, and she decides this whole thing ends with a weird puzzle night. You know what I'm saying? This isn't a final battle, this is a retiree date night. I'm not complaining though, a battle would be lame, and I'm into these puzzles. I know this is kind of the same thing I complained about last episode, but there's way fewer of them, with more variety, are more easily solved, and do not require 5 minutes of block pushing. Like, I actually enjoyed them enough to do them myself.
Agree.
Not really much of a challenge for mine.
Sudoku.
It's Sudoku, yeah. It's 4-square Sudoku. Let's not get too excited. In the end, Manny and Graham are both equally capable of solving the puzzle, so Manny decides to leave it to chance. One goblet is caustic poison and one is not, and Graham picks the good one. So Manny dumps the other into this portal to the castle that's just been here. Graham uses his hands to stop it, and Manny's like, I'm gonna ragdoll your ass. Mordak sees this and feels bad, remembering that it was Graham who had freed him from goblin slavery, so I guess he was a slave? Like, that's what we're running with now? So, like, was he just cool with the whole Alexander thing? Did he know? Manny couldn't have possibly hid it for 18 years. Is this Neon Genesis Evangelion?
Yeah.
Anyway, Mordak decides to kill Manny about it, and he and Graham are bros. Graham concludes that it was a good end to the story. Gart and Gwendolyn both say their goodbyes to Graham, who promises that they'll have breakfast together in the morning before their parents send them to bed for the night. And Graham, much like this episode, passes quietly into that good night. In the morning, Gwendolyn goes into his room, passing the very beautiful tapestries, reading a note he left behind for her.
What are you doing? One last puzzle? You offer me, Grandma?
When passing the magic mirror, she sees an adventure that awaits her and excitedly leaves, now Queen of Daventry, because fuck the Green Isles. Now, there is an epilogue that I can't access because the season pass is apparently a different thing from the complete edition, and you can't buy the complete edition on Steam, a fact that is very deeply annoying to me. So my sibling and I just watched someone else play it, but honestly it's so short and simple, I'll just sum it up here. It follows Gwendolyn tracking these ugly cute turkey lizards and eventually running into Taskia, Jaqcues' granddaughter, because I'm so serious they cannot let it go. She also refuses to speak English despite clearly being able to understand it, which is based, but she and Gwendolyn are best friends now after surviving a perilous chase together, the end. And that's it. That's King's Quest 2015. So, episode 4 was very bad, and it did make my expectations for this episode low, but I think it's pretty inoffensive. While I wouldn't call it amazing by any means, it's passable. It is what it is. It's not doing anything actively wrong. That's the quote they'll have. That's the quote they'll have on the box, not doing anything actively wrong. Maybe it's just that joke I made a few paragraphs ago, but this episode does sort of feel like it's just peacefully passing away. It got its chance to say goodbye, to make its peace with what it is. Accepting the end would not be glorious, but it would be an end. And I guess I kind of like it for being that, I don't think what this game ended up being is really what anyone imagined or wanted, but I think this is about as dignified an end as it could get. And you know what? I did feel something during this episode. I'll admit I'm not a hard sell when it comes to raw emotionality. I get invested into the emotions of a narrative pretty easily, but I think it works. We spent a lot of time with this character and the dynamics of this family, so it's a little sad seeing a beloved grandfather pass away. So before we say our goodbyes to this game once and for all, let's give it our all and one last hurrah and spend an intermission talking about Manny. So, what's up with this guy, right? I mean, I know the answer, or can speculate on it in a very Occam's razor sort of way. They wanted an overarching villain and chose Manannan, likely specifically for the drama that could be explored through episode 4's plot, leading to 3 and 5's plot falling into place, with episodes 1 and 2 using this character in completely original ways in order to establish him as the primary villain. But why is he a goblin? Genuinely, I'm so curious. Why is Manannan a goblin? And why is his goal fighting for goblin rights? If you worked on this game and made it through that part where I was really mean about Chapter 4, I'm dying to know, what was the thought process here? What do we gain from evil child enslaving wizard Manannan being a goblin who wanted Daventry's throne largely to disprove the racist assumption that goblins are less capable than humans? In episode 5, Graham says all Manny actually wanted was to just be a vengeful shit towards Graham. And by the end, I do believe that's true, loose as it is of a character arc, but he didn't know Graham when entering the tournament, so I must assume his motives were sincere, and then he lost chess to some underhanded twink once and he never got over it. Which in his defense, neither have I. And most bizarrely, why does he feel it's necessary to turn himself into a human? The game never gives us a reason for this, and the Doylist answer is obviously that Manannan in the original games is a human, so they have to bring that back around somehow. But when Graham asks what happened, Manny just says his mind outgrew his body, which wasn't the whole point to demonstrate that goblins and humans are equally mentally capable? The internalized racism this man must be combating is unreal. This is such an interesting facet of this character that just never gets explored. An element of this character is that he is motivated by the severe discrimination he faces as a goblin, specifically in regards to assumptions about his intellectual capacity, but by the time Graham's children are born, he doesn't consider his goblin body worthy of carrying his mind anymore. And isn't that kind of sad? When you think about this game from Manny's perspective, it's kind of a tragedy. Manny enters the Knights Tournament of Daventry to prove he is as capable as any human, and while he himself competes cleanly, he's perfectly willing to orchestrate his competition best he can, letting Jaqcues know about the dragon in the well in the hopes he would die, and helping Graham stay in the competition because he believes Graham would be easiest to beat. During the Duel of Wits, he offers the added challenge of the hypnosis powder that Graham is well informed of and could have absolutely refused, but does choose to go through with. But when Graham loses, Larry and Kyle interfere so that Manny's win cannot be counted. And no matter how many times Manny wins, either with or without a hypnotized Graham, the game does not move forward until Graham wins, because everyone else around Manny has decided Graham must win and any other outcome is unfair. Graham, the guy who simply could not have won the duel of strength or speed legitimately, and who only got as far as he did through Manny. And you know what? I can understand how that might embitter you, how ruining the life of a king ruling over a population in the double digits might become more than what it is. Graham is not some guy, he is the status quo. He is that nameless force keeping Manny from integrating into human society, keeping all goblins from integrating into human society. And Graham does nothing to help the goblins. Even in Chapter 3, after we learn more about their culture and their plight, they're still used as generic enemies. And no mention is ever made of Graham doing anything to offer better resources for goblin kind or help those who want to integrate do so. Chapter 5 is sort of a wash in this regard due to Graham's memory being totally unreliable at this point. The possible realities are either that goblins started living above the surface in their own village or that Graham sealed up all the passages, which are too contradictory to pull anything from, so the best we get is Graham saying he has no problem with them, but no evidence he's ever helped them either, and maybe after a while it just fucking got to Manny. Maybe goblins just don't win. Now look, obviously enslaving and abusing a child about it is a bridge too far, but damn dude, I'd be pissed too. I really didn't expect this to be the hot take I would have in this video, but there you have it. Manny is a bad person, but his motives are far more sympathetic and interesting than the story story gives him credit for, and I think they could have done more with this character. So before we reach our conclusion here, I just want to say one thing. While I do call this game an all-ages game, and I do think that's the fairest way to describe it, I do see a reality where people are watching this video and are listening to my criticisms and go, but it's a kid's game. And see, when people say that, I don't like it. I do think it's fair to say your expectations and criticisms are unreasonable because you are not considering the fact the target audience of children will respond to this narrative in a different way, or your expectations and criticisms are unfair because the target audience of children have less life experience and can't appreciate certain ideas as a result and aren't yet at the point of being able to handle certain topics. But a lot of times when people say it's for kids, what their point boils down to is whether or not I think your expectations and criticisms are valid is irrelevant to the fact that I do not respect the target audience enough to assume changing the material in any way would be meaningfully impactful to their viewing experience, and you're stupid for caring. I might have added that last part. I see this shit a lot with Miraculous Ladybug. But like, here's the thing, Miraculous Ladybug is a show where they expect the target audience to be invested in a story where one of the key tensions is that one of the heroes is the son of the main villain, and they both have their secret identities hidden from one another, which is a complicated layer on top of an already deeply strained relationship. And if they expect their target audience to be invested in that story, then I believe they should be held to that standard and be expected to tell that story well. Kane's Quest isn't for 2-year-olds who barely understand language yet. It's for kids who can get invested in the drama of a false friend and the tragic death of a real one, and reuniting with their long-lost son after they got imprisoned and abused. And they deserve a good story for their investment, even if they can't put their finger on why the story is bad. And that's my tangent on that. At the end of episode 4, once the mic was off, my sibling and I were talking about how much we really didn't like it. And they said to me that after Jaqcues' death, they felt like that was the turning point. It was the mood setter. Because it well and truly is the game's strongest moment. It's a short but effective story about a friendship that tragically ended before it could even start. And there's a part of me that kind of wants to shit on Odd Gentleman and point out how they keep bringing him up because that's their most effective emotional moment in the entire story and they know it. And that's sort of why I kept pointing out how they won't let him go. I expected to find it really silly and ineffective. I expected to feel it was dragging down the story. But if I'm being honest with myself, I don't feel that way. I was always happy to see that Jaqcues was still here in some way, even as I told myself not to be. And you know, I think that's why we play these kinds of games. At least in my own view, what draws people to these sort of games is the relationships characters share with one another. The Walking Dead Season 1 was so successful because players felt like their relationships with the characters mattered. Lee was his own person, and he was an interesting person to be, a man who killed his wife's lover after catching them together and was on his way to prison when the apocalypse broke out. He finds Clementine along the way, and with no one else to look after her, he decides to, and she trusts him, and Lee must decide what taking care of her looks like under the circumstances. They live with other survivors, and there's a pretty good variety in how Lee can interact with them, given the different conflicts between a lot of headstrong personalities, which will influence their attitudes towards Lee, with this demonstrated most in the last episode, where those who like Lee will help him look for Clementine when she goes missing. And of course, as Clementine's new parent in this very stressful time, he leaves a big impact on her that she carries well after his death, and he dies doing whatever he can to keep her safe, so she can live and maybe one day find a new normal. God, Walking Dead Season 1 is good. These episodic choices matter kinds of games I think are most effective when you have a relationship in the focus you can care about. For Lee, it's Clementine, and for Clementine in Season 4, it's AJ. In Batman Season 2, a huge chunk of the story is dedicated to Bruce's relationship with John Doe, and Life is Strange has Max and Chloe. Of course, this isn't a universal rule written in stone. I think Tales from the Borderlands Season 1 was strong enough without an intense focus on any one relationship, but Season 2 and 3 of The Walking Dead kind of try these sorts of relationships but fail. Well, Season 3 does with Gabriel and the rest of Hobby's family, and I tolerate Gabriel more than most, but even I don't think this can overcome all the flaws. And the family drama as a whole was just kind of a this is too unpleasant to care about sort of thing. And Season 2 has a survivor group. The closest we get in this season is Sarah, but Telltale hates Sarah. Telltale really said, if you're neurodivergent and a minor, I hope you die in the zombie apocalypse. And I think that's kind of why Jaqcues sticks around. While your choices don't really influence your relationship, it does feel like your actions mattered and you put work and thought into the relationship. And I think that's why this is brought up, even though this anchor character should be Gwendolyn, who does change somewhat as a result of your choices. But I don't think it works because these don't really change your attitude, and you never really did anything to her. She changes because she's influenced by the lessons imparted in your stories, not because you did anything with her. It's too too much of a layer of abstraction. In truth, choices do not matter in this game, and character presence is so sporadic that any chance of these relationships feeling meaningful never comes through, and I think that's in part due to the anthology approach this game has. The events are so distant and characters so inconsistent in presence that it feels like a collection of stories rather than one whole story, even as it follows one guy in his conflict with one antagonist. I'm not saying this format could never work, but this game certainly doesn't make it work, and I think the episodic nature plays a role. It provides such a harsh divide between events that it makes the distance feel even greater. A lot of what brought people back to these kinds of games is the continuation of a complete narrative with a level of interactivity and consequence that carries over. Lee finding Clementine and other survivors to live with is a different story from the survivors finding farmers who are secretly cannibals, but both are beats in the story of Lee looking after Clem and their building relationship. The episodes in King's Quest are all about different things and ultimately are only really connected by Gwendolyn, who is only influenced in a detached way and will ultimately turn out the same no matter what you did, especially because the game gives up with choices mattering halfway through. I really wanted to come up here and be able to celebrate this game with you all, highlighting its strengths as we acknowledge its flaws, because I remember the first episode. I remembered loving the characters and the setting and enjoying the gameplay. I replayed that first episode several times when I was younger because I was brought in by that adventure game magic and whimsy, but the truth is the primary word I would use to describe this experience is inconsistent. The quality of things like writing and art are inconsistent and get really bad in episode 4. The narrative is so diversified and focused that it lowers investment. Even the gameplay is inconsistent in every chapter, and the main thing emotionally unifying this whole game is the shadow of a Jaqcues looming over everything. So, do I recommend this game? Not in totality. Despite how harsh I've been, I would still genuinely recommend episode 1 to any adventure game fans out there. Episode 2 doesn't really have that same narrative drive, but if you really enjoy adventure game style puzzles and want a fix, I think this episode will do that for you. Episode 3 I don't think is very engaging on a gameplay level and doesn't have great narrative flow. I do really like the ending. I think it's an overall positive, but I don't really know if I'd recommend it. Episode 4, I think you know how I feel about it. Don't play this episode. You will gain nothing from it. Episode 5 is fine, but I would also not recommend it. And if you want a choices matter style game, I don't think this game is going to scratch that itch, honestly. You should play Telltale Batman Season 2 instead. Not a lot of people have, and I need people to know how good it is. Alright, I guess the video's over. So I would like to thank my sibling for recording with me. I know it was pretty miserable sometimes, but I really do appreciate you being there. I think it will add a lot to the video. I'd like to thank One Short Eye. He posts a lot of adventure game speedrunning breakdowns that I really enjoy watching, and that's what inspired me to make this video, so go check him out. I'd like to thank Sanguine. I don't know why you posted the entire soundtrack, but it made my life easier. I'd like to thank all my friends for cheering me on throughout the process, and lastly, I'd like to thank you all for watching, most especially my precious 43 subscribers. Oh, hold on, how many subscribers do I have? Most especially my precious 53 subscribers. I know literally everyone says this, but I felt really cool after taking such a long time making this video to look and see an entire 53 people were there to show their support. Y'all are rad. I don't know what I'll be posting next, but it will probably be a while before I take on a project like this again. So, goodbye and good night.